Mike, ready to go? Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the slight or short delay there. For some technical reasons, we had to delay the start of today's proceedings. My name is Dennis Gudasic, and I'm, apart from my role as the Executive Director of Lokomotiva Zagreb, I'm also one of the co-founders of the Union of European Clubs. Thank you, everybody, for making the effort to be here with us today. I understand you all have busy schedules, so thank you for being a part of our Professional Football Forum event. So in opening today's event, as we talk about the challenges we face in European football, our thoughts and prayers are also with those who face far more important challenges as they suffer in conflicts in Israel and Ukraine. We especially stand shoulder to shoulder with those affected clubs, members of the UEC, who would have otherwise been in attendance here today, and offer condolences for the innocent lives lost. We are deeply sorry to see the recent developments and would like to send you our prayers for peace and hope for a quick resolution to the crisis. Somebody could bring up the first slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. So only 6 months ago, we gathered here in the same city, in Brussels, the administrative centre of European Union, to launch our initiative with the aim of changing the way clubs are represented in the decision-making processes of European football. We had 40 clubs from 25 countries physically in attendance, and more than 60 clubs who followed the event online. It was particularly encouraging to receive strong support from EU institutions, the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Margaritis Skinas, and Thomas Frankowski from the European Parliament. Next slide, please. The UEC is now officially incorporated here in Brussels with the Belgian Ministry of Justice, and since our launch event in April, we have been growing far beyond expectations, and really and truly as a success story. The collective strength of the UEC has already proven to benefit those clubs that were previously outside looking in. Stakeholders have openly recognised that the UEC platform is the most responsible for the recent UEFA decision to increase the solidarity for non-participating clubs from 4% to 7%. Next slide, please. The UEC has an interim board which will lead the organisation to our first General Assembly, comprising of Osasuna from Spain, Lokomotiva Zagreb from Croatia, RFS from Latvia, Bohemian from Ireland, Union Saint-Gilloise from Belgium, and Maccabi Netanya from Israel. The voice of 1,400 clubs, and if I could have the next slide, is not heard and the UEC aims to represent these clubs. In the words of Mr. Skinas from our launch event, all football clubs need to be heard and treated equally. Size should not matter. The launch of the UEC is a strong commitment to European solidarity and togetherness. Even though the UEC membership drive started only in May, the organisation currently counts more than 120 members, and it will soon have more full voting right members than ECA. All UEC members are equal. They have equal voting, equal right to vote, equal right to run for the board. Membership is free of charge, and there are no categories of membership or divisions between clubs in terms of rights and obligations. These principles are not just phrases used to create a false impression on social media. They are firmly embedded in the UEC statutes and operations. The UEC is not substituting these rights with any ECA-style services and tiered membership. Why do we need the UEC? If there is only one club representation body, there's a huge contradiction about ECA. They want to maintain the status of being the exclusive body representing all clubs, but on the other hand, they're not even allowing all clubs to join, let alone vote. A so-called network-level membership has been introduced, offering no voting rights and no influence on decisions. These clubs are only there to provide legitimacy and mitigate the damage caused to the clubs by ECA's own existence and influence. Even a casual observer can easily recognise that ECA is not a democracy and that it is not operating according to the standards of good governance. The fact remains that ECA was born out of the first G14 Super League initiative, and more than 20 years later, they themselves parented the recent rebirth of the same project. The Super League idea is in the ECA DNA. The real goal of ECA is hidden, and the real goal is to continue the process of kidnapping and hijacking European club competitions from UEFA, for ECA to become the competition organiser and for UEFA to be the regulator. They already have the biggest piece in the pie, but they want to make it bigger. This is why the UEC is so important. We are the only counterbalance to this plan. Decisions on a European level have a strong effect on all leagues and all clubs, even the non-participating ones. 15 years ago, this may have not been the case, but today the effects are visible. That's why this counterbalance provided by the UEC is so important. We stand aligned with fans across Europe who are not happy with the direction football is taking. The communities fans belong to support their clubs as a place of gathering. It's about hope. Hope that their community, those fans on the trains and in the pubs, can inspire their team to push on and reach the next level, whatever that may be, but the ladder of success has been pulled out from beneath them. And it's preventing aspiring clubs from progressing. So there has to be aspiration, because without it, this sport will become soulless forever. We have a different view on what football should look like in 5 and 10 years. The current decision-making processes are undemocratic and go against the spirit of the game and how football fans want to see the game develop. We are in regular contact with EU institutions, and we aim to achieve formal recognition as a stakeholder in the European football system with UEFA and as a social dialogue partner in EU institutions towards the end of this year. In our discussions, they see the UEC as a game changer, and our development will continue in line with the key goals and values of the European Union and the governing body. In that sense, we see ourselves as a buffer zone, helping protect decision-making in UEFA from influence of purely financial interests. It's time to recognise the importance of clubs and, most importantly, the national competitions they are affiliated with as the foundation of our game, not a small group of clubs making decisions on behalf of everyone. Today's event and the stakeholder diversity in this room is important. It gives us the opportunity to ask ourselves, can the current decision-making process take us to a brighter future for football? We have 93 clubs from 28 countries represented here today. We have another 7 clubs that are also in the room. We've just been updated this morning, so that's why we have the slide updated. So we have additional 7 clubs that came this morning. We also have 16 leagues represented, 42 stakeholders, plus many media and EU representatives. The event is a reflection on what the decision-making process should look like, with all stakeholders involved. Yes, maybe we'll not agree on everything, but we will discuss and listen to each other. But we need to seek the accommodation of all stakeholders so they can contribute to a more balanced and fair decision-making process in European football. We all have the opportunity to contribute and change the way decisions are made and choosing the best path for football's future. We look forward to today's event, which we will have a properly focused discussion on the rising challenges, the future governance model and new solidarity initiatives in European football. We look forward to the contributions of high-profile speakers representing clubs, stakeholders, European institutions and experts from the industry. I wish you all an insightful event, and once again, thank you for making the effort to be here today. So to kick off today's proceedings, we are proud to have Laurent Thieule with us. He will be a Master of Ceremonies. Laurent has 25 years of experience in working in EU institutions and is the honorary president of the European think tank Sport and Citizenship. And I now kindly ask him to take the stage to commence today's proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for inviting me. Just one remark. I'm not a master of ceremony because this is not a ceremony. This is an open conference. And I think you understood since the very beginning of your good story that you had to be transparent, open. This is the way of life in the European institution, inviting people from the European Parliament, from the European Commission. Here, this is a kind of bubble of European Union decision-making, but people are transparent, open. So thank you for being there today. I can be a master if you want, but not of ceremony. So I am honorary president of Sport and Citizenships, which is a think tank that we created 15 years ago. I have the age to become not executive, but honorary president. That's the reason why I am there today. And happy to try to give some way of this meeting. I will be helped by in this way by with Ali Walker, with a moderator, a professional journalist in Politico, and I think that the timing is very strict, so we have to respect. Me gustaría agradecer al presidente de la Liga por ser venido de Madrid.
Thank you so much to La Liga for coming from Madrid. I know you're going to take the floor later. Now we're going to give the floor to start off our meeting with the co-chairman, with Mr. Ibán García del Blanco, who's going to talk about democracy and transparency, which is a most important role of the group that you preside. Mr. Ibán García Blanco, who is member of the European Parliament.
We are currently living hard times, so allow me to raise my voice, first of all, to express my solidarity with victims in Israel and Palestine, and express my condemn against terrorism, and of course asking for a stopping of the violence in the region. I think that it's quite important to take in mind that there are some grave happenings ongoing, and we have to take a look always to that. But today we are here to speak about sports and to speak about football and the principles that are behind football. It is a pleasure for me, indeed, to participate in this European Professional Football Forum, not just as a member of the European Parliament for my engagement with the sports group, as was mentioned, that operates within the European Parliament, but also as a football fan, who is eager to see more democracy, fairness, and sustainability in the football clubs across Europe. Sport is, among other things, one of the few spaces left in society in which people of all ages, ethnicities, ideologies, and economic and social origins come together to work as a team and strengthen ties with their communities. That is why the European Union understands sport as a tool to improve general well-being and help overcome broader social issues, such as racism, social exclusion, and gender inequality. In this sense, the European sport model, recognized for the first time on the white paper on sport, approved by the European Commission in 2007, embraces and promotes a values-based model grounded in the specific nature of sport. Thus, it is important for the European institutions to focus our efforts in the promotion of sport at all levels, and consequently, it is what we do at the European Parliament. The sports group that operates within the European Parliament, which I am a member of, is a platform that allows sport stakeholders and policymakers together exchange views and explore collaboration opportunities, such as in the field of physical activity promotion. In November 2021, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the European Union sports policy. The document emphasizes the need to promote initiatives for healthy and active lifestyles, covering from infrastructure to campaigns, to education and training, to sustainability of the sports sector. Also, the Council's work plan for sports 2021 to 2024 proposes plans to promote sport as well as guaranteeing sustainability, the prioritization of skills and qualifications in sports through best practice exchanges and knowledge building, the protection of integrity and values, as well as socio-economic and environmental dimensions of sports and the promotion of gender equality. Furthermore, in line with the fundamental objectives of the European Union, green sports, so-called green sports, are promoted in the fight against climate change, as well as innovation and digitalization in the field of sport. Also, the social importance of sport was also affirmed by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which explicitly emphasized the role of sport in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. With this being said, now I would like to address two key features of our sport model. First, the pyramid structure with a mutually reinforcing system of solidarity, with amateur sport at the base and professional sport at the top. In Europe, all professional clubs are part of the integrated football pyramid with a high level of interdependence between all clubs. The top clubs would not be top clubs without those that occupy other levels in the pyramid structure and perform the crucial role. Every club brings a valuable contribution and essential input in the work of the whole football ecosystem, and all clubs take part in the production process of the top competitions, both on domestic and European level. We are not just talking about the financial solidarity scheme, which allows financial transfers between different levels and operators, specifically from the top to the bottom of the pyramid. The small and medium-sized clubs are the lifeblood of the European football, and their sustainability and competitiveness are essential, not just for them, but for their communities. Football is not only about global brand clubs. It is about all clubs who rely on their communities for support, and it is about towns who rely on their clubs to preserve the local traditions and culture, engage in youth development and education. We have to work keeping in mind that football is part of all our identities and has the power to change people's lives. These clubs are the gathering point for the communities and fans who inspire them to keep the dream alive, the dream of winning the domestic and European competitions. Safeguarding these social values and equal opportunities for all professional clubs are at the heart of the European Union's sport policy and within the commitment of the sport group. That is why we stand for. And this is the second feature I want to talk about, an autonomous and independent top-down approach, with members adhering to organizational roles on the possibility of electing governing bodies, as federations have not only a central role for sports, but also a primary responsibility in the conduct of sporting affairs. However, this requires a high degree of transparency and accountability and alignment with national European legal frameworks. It is undeniable that significant economic benefits across the Union that football brings, but football is much more than that. Therefore, applying a purely commercial market-based approach, as one might apply a for-profit commercial organization, is probably not the best way towards the regulation and organization of sport under the European model, and by doing so, we put in jeopardy. As the only way to restore competitive balance a concept that gives practical meaning to the open system of competitions that is protected under the treaty itself, the Treaty of the European Union itself, is by having equal voice in the governance. It is useful to remind ourselves that the governing bodies, such as UEFA, are under the duty, arising out of the court's jurisprudence, to provide a system of undistorted competition that can be guaranteed only if equality of opportunities is secured as between the various economic operators. This is a simple acknowledgement of the fact that without the ability to have an equal vote over the rules that govern them, the clubs are deprived of equality of opportunities both on the market and in terms of their sporting performance. Therefore, democracy, representativeness, and gender equality are imperative on the decision-making boards. And the quality and quantity of representation of all affected stakeholders in the decision-making process must be equal regardless of the wealth or the size of the market they come from. Parliament already has approved a resolution on all sports stakeholder organizations to attain to the appropriate levels of representativeness as a prerequisite of the involvement in collective decision-making processes. Because this is currently not the case in European football at different levels of organizations. It is time to change a system that brings only men to the board and doesn't give voice to all the concerned parties. Conscious of this reality, the Union of European Clubs has been set up to give voice to those that are either unrepresented or inadequately represented in the current structures. This Union of European Clubs goals are to make European professional football more sustainable, more accessible and fairer, embedding the core values of the Union by giving voice to at least 92% of the professional football clubs who currently do not have full voting rights or no membership and voting rights at all in the existing structures. Thus, the sports group of the European Parliament supports these objectives enshrined by the goals of this association, including the goal of achieving formal recognition as a recognized stakeholder in the European football ecosystem and a social partner in the Union's Social Dialogue Committee for Professional Football. Thank you again for having me today, and I wish plenty of success for this event. Thank you so much.
Dennis, thank you very much, President. I think your words are going in the sense as you described, Dennis, yes, and you must be happy. What about you heard, no?
Yes, I'm very happy.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to take the floor?
Because we had a late start, and thank you to Mr. García for his speech. Because we had a late start, and because I think the content and everything that we're interested to hear is going to come from the panel discussion, I will just quickly introduce what our first panel discussion will be addressing. So we will be talking about how to protect European football from associations without financial fair play and unlimited resources. Is the foreign subsidies regulation an adequate mechanism to address market distortions? And also, what are the implications of the multi-club ownership on competition integrity? So without further ado, I would like to call Laurent to introduce the panel participants, and I look forward to the first panel discussion.
Let me the name. The first panel. Okay. Jean-François Brocard, un compatriote. Thank you for coming from Limoges. Very committed in sports with a very particular laboratory of sports that is represented today. Thank you, Jean-François, pour être venu. Fran Canal del Club de Osasuna. Hola, Fran, bienvenido. En Pamplona hay dos cosas poderosas.
In Pamplona, there are two powerful things, bullfighting and football, of course.
The Irish club from Bohemian Football Club, I hope Ireland will win the World Cup, not against France, but I would prefer France to win but you have a strong rugby team. It's not so easy to defend football position in a rugby country, isn't it? So, Ali, please take the floor and do your job of a moderator. Have a nice debate.
I'm fine, thanks. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion we're about to have on this panel. I'd like to start maybe with Daniel, once he's finished pouring the water for us. Daniel, can you just talk us through the kind of financial landscape at the moment in the League of Ireland and the challenges that you see in 2023?
Yeah, so just to give you an introduction, look, I'm conscious that Ireland is a small league. We're a small club. Bohemians is a very old club, 133 years old, but we get about 5,000 attendances, and we've played in the top division for 133 years in a row. But the financial landscape in Ireland is probably different, and we speak about stakeholders having a voice, and I don't think we're a league that's really considered, as many other leagues aren't, of a similar size. But we'd have no broadcast deal in Ireland, one of the few European leagues with no broadcast deal. We'd have low transfer income into the league historically, because most players leave at a quite young age and they go to the UK, given our proximity to the UK market. And ultimately, clubs' incomes are almost exclusively derived from matchday income, which is obviously something that's quite different. And our mix of income would be heavily balanced in the matchday income area. And we've seen in recent years in the league, with the changes of European competition, things that should have been and outwardly were positives to the football fan base and the general football community in Ireland publicly look like they're actually quite negative in terms of their impact on our league. So probably the best example, historically Irish teams don't qualify for European group stage competition. Very, very rarely. Prior to the European Conference League, 2 clubs had qualified, and it was done on the basis that they were really outsiders, the underdog, and they overachieved with a certain group of players, and they found themselves in a group stage competition where they were heavily beaten in the competition, but the achievement was getting there. But because this was an outside chance, clubs didn't heavily bet on trying to get there. It was something that could potentially be achieved, but it didn't make financial sense to try and achieve it, if that makes sense. With the dawn of the European Conference League, it looked like a real positive. The team who would win the league has quite an easy route and should progress to group stage football. The problem with this is we have such low prize money in our country. You're talking about 120,000 euros to win the league, versus a team who finishes first place who should access 3.4 million. It's the equivalent of winning the league for 30 years in a row. And that has created this massive imbalance. The other couple of spaces that go to European competitions, these clubs are ranked differently. It's impossible for them to qualify for group stage. We were there in 2021. We'll hopefully be there next year. And the best we can achieve is 3 qualifying rounds. We will then be knocked out. It's the way it's structured. But this has created now the potential in Ireland to have a Scottish-type situation where you just have a huge imbalance, but rather than Celtic and Rangers, have one club who, because of the financial resources and backing they have, can achieve first place, generate that income, do it again, and once they've done it 2 or 3 times, the scale of finance is so vast that nobody can compete with them again. And it just highlights, I suppose, as we've heard from Dennis and as we heard with the previous speaker, you know, the Irish League is not considered. We're not part of the stakeholder process. We're not part of the decision-making process. And what looks like a positive is actually a negative for the league and has the potential to destroy competition in our league. While fans of certain clubs see a great opportunity here for teams to qualify, and it is a positive for, you know, an Irish team to be there, the impact is actually hugely negative. And I think that you know, in itself, that example, the need to have a representative body, a democratic body, where clubs can join. And I'm under no illusion that, you know, the League of Ireland should be a priority at European level. It shouldn't be, but there should be a voice for the clubs in Ireland to outline their reality and how these competitions impact them and the finance impacts them.
Fran, if I can come to you next. Fran, the General Director at Osasuna in LALIGA. Obviously, LALIGA operates in a different financial environment to the League of Ireland, but do you see common challenges in LALIGA as with the League of Ireland, and what solutions do you see to them?
Good morning, everyone. Well, what is clear is that even though we have the advantage that we possibly have the best financial control, it's fair and very strong of all European leagues. It's also true to say that it makes us in a weaker position because when our teams have to compete in Europe, we have to compete against teams who have other type of financing. So for us, that's a problem. And obviously, what we understand, the teams, or some of the bigger teams of my country, what we understand is that we have to achieve a salary cap because we have to think that like the NBA with a salary cap for all the teams would be a way to a certain extent to be able to work better because we wouldn't have all these, budgets without any limits, because to know that there's a salary cap that could be used for the different squads, and it's a way of making this football a lot more democratic. The competition would be more democratic because in the past, European competitions didn't have influence on the domestic competitions, but at the moment we share lots of match days. And weeks ago, the Club World Cup was announced, and it was going to be held in June, which means that the national leagues will have to finish our championships earlier, which means obviously our calendars are much tighter, and so you need to have a lot more players, because obviously if you have any players that are injured, then you obviously means that if you don't have sufficient players, you could be weaker compared to your competitors. So when we're living in a global community, as we are today, we have to be aware that all the teams have an influence. And so if we work with a salary cap, and if we worked with a system like the one that my colleague from Bohemian was defending, where football was more democratic in such a way that we would be participating in the decision-making process. So all the elements, not just those powerful teams, but the teams who play often or not so often in European competition, or even those teams who who participate in the leagues in our own countries. So this would mean that all the teams who may participate, we all have some relation to the others. Now the TV market is global, European competitions. Previously, the European competitions didn't have an influence on the domestic competitions, but then I have too much influence. So the less powerful teams on a financial level, not just mine, but I'm saying I think it would be very important for the players to be listened to, because last year there was a World Cup in November, which meant that all the seasons for all the countries had to stop. And so they haven't just gone to win the World Cup just national players, but we have a lot of players who for 6 months couldn't compete, because we didn't get our broadcasting money, we didn't get our match day money because of the World Cup. So this means that we live now in a global economy. So to a certain extent, we have to work to make sure that the voice of the small clubs is heard, and also the players' voices are heard, and everyone else who is involved in this business.
I'm just going to come back to Daniel for one here. Obviously, we've heard a lot of talk in recent months, over the last couple of years, about multi-club ownership. Is that something you've observed the effect of even down at League of Ireland level?
Yeah, it is. Again, a small league, but like many other leagues, there are billionaire owners, and there are now multi-clubs for the first time. We've seen, I think all football clubs, I don't think we can fully understand the impact of this yet. I think people are still figuring out, where the potential kind of problems are, and there are a lot of them. The two that we've kind of encountered initially, so first of all, historically, like I mentioned earlier on, players would leave Ireland, the top players would leave at 16 when they're allowed to leave, and they almost exclusively go to the UK. It's mainly a cultural thing, obviously, with language, and that we're isolated. The idea of bilingual in Ireland is rare, so a lot of players are most comfortable going to the UK. One of the changes that impacted us in terms of Brexit, which looked like a positive for our clubs, was that players have to go at 18 now to the UK, but they can go at 16 to Europe, which wasn't the market that anyone really went to. And what's happened now is we see UK multi-clubs. We had an example recently of a Belgian club who came, and what they do is they kind of sell the British club, normally a Premier League club, to the player and the agent at 16. and they take them to a European club in France, in Belgium, in Germany, at a lower level. And the impact upon that, and it removes one of our key financial kind of routes, even though it's low, it's still important, and it damages it even further. So you take a player who would leave at 18 to go to a Premier League club, the categorization is a Cat 1 club. So we're working off the RSTP model where it's, you know, a high amount per year, and they're leaving at age 18. So we might have 3, 4, 5 years under the compensation model if the contract was to run out, and we've low, like, small contract lengths in Ireland due to agents. What's now happened is that same player leaves at 16 and he's going to a lower category club in terms of compensation, but really what he's being sold is the English club. So he goes to join a club on the continent, but realistically he's joining the multi-club model, whether it's the City Group or anybody else, and that removes, takes the player from us earlier at a lower price and basically just drains what is already a small market. And the other impact is lots more, but the other impact that's become apparent is domestically. We now have a couple of multi-club models in our league, and it's growing. And our domestic compensation rates, because we're a small football industry, are low to enable players to move in the league, and that's right and proper. But now what's happened is you can get a multi-club model where they'll take a player from Bohemians to a multi-club within the league, pay a very small amount of domestic compensation, and instantly move them as part of their multi-club to the UK, circumventing the RSTP model. And this is not only bad for Bohemians, but this is bad for the league. It's reducing the finance in the league, and that's becoming apparent. Both of those have just become apparent to us in the last 18 months. And again, we've no mechanism to raise this at a European level whatsoever.
You mentioned at the European level. If I can come to Jean-François here, it seems like the panelists here and the panelists to come have all identified issues with various aspects of European football governance. Is that something in your research that you've also identified? And how does that also relate to the European model of sport, which we've heard a little bit about from Mr. García and from Dennis already?
Yeah, thank you. This is very important because the recognition for the diversity among stakeholders, in my understanding, is a good sign of good governance. And the good governance of football is going to lead to a better protection from the European judges. We have several indications in the publications from European institutions. The European Commission gives a definition of good governance. And one of the criteria is the recognition of the diversity, and that's something crucial. And a lot of different institutions in Europe took into account this fact. The European Parliament in 2016 create a pledge, had the institutions sign a pledge to implement a better governance. In 2017, the Council, the European Council, gave a recommendations for sports institutions to implement a better governance. So that's definitely something very important. And then it's no surprise that the judges take this criteria to motivate their decisions. And when we take, for example, one of the latest case with the International Skating Union, one of the criteria used to motivate the decision was that this federation didn't implement a good enough governance. And so that they were not protected enough, and the use of the specificity of sport did not lead to a good protection of the actors. So definitely this kind of movement, which will definitely have bring a better governance, will hopefully, in my understanding, lead to a better protection from the European judges.
Fran, if I can come back to you, and back to the subject of multi-club ownership. Daniel's talked about the issues he's observed in Ireland related to that. Is that something you're also concerned about? And what specific issues have you seen, if there are any, in Spain?
Well, obviously, it's not the ideal format for these multi-clubs, but you have to understand that we have to adapt to the new times and to reality. We have a case in our league, and I think it's something that if you define the rules properly, it can be perfectly valid. I think there are two issues that have to be perfectly defined. One is, if two teams from the same owner have to face each other in European competitions, to a certain extent, we have to maintain the integrity of the competition. And to do that, we have to clearly define the rules that have to be established that the two teams that are owned with the same owner can compete, or they can coincide in the same competition. And secondly, of course, we have the issue related to the fact that you have to respect the financial integrity, because at the end of the day in our country we have rules, and the most ideal thing would be that all Europe would be applying the financial fair play. And if it's applied, then we pay attention to financial fair play. So you don't pay a player from one team, and then this player is playing for another team from the same owner. So, the team who he plays for has to pay for the player's salary. So they shouldn't be, passing players from one team to another. So I think the financial integrity model should be really taken into account, and then it would be viable.
Thank you. Jean-François, in Brussels over the last couple of months, we've been hearing about the foreign subsidies regulation. And, we have a complaint by LALIGA to the European Commission about Paris Saint-Germain receiving, in their view, foreign subsidies from Qatar. Do you see that that EU regulation could be something to address what critics say is a problem with state ownership of football clubs?
Yeah, it's a very tricky question. I think we have a saying in France, I don't know if it exists in other countries, that money doesn't smell, which means that wherever you take the money, you should take it because it's going to be good, you're going to take advantage of it. And I think that's the question football should wonder at the moment. Is any kind of money good for football? There's a lot of money poured into clubs coming from, of course, outside of Europe countries. And so far, the institutions did not really take the courage to say that they're going to select and try and create criterias. And they take any kind of money that is poured into football. But that's not only an economic question, it's also a philosophical question, and I'm not the one who's going to have to decide, but definitely the financialization of football is pretty clear at the moment. The first wave was, for example, example of the first wave was the creation of the TPO, the third-party ownership, when investors invested in shares of economic rights of players. Then it was banned, and then this money came into clubs shares, and as an economist, I was pretty happy that the TPO was banned, because I thought that it would be easier for institutions to regulate actors becoming owners of clubs. But so far, the regulation is pretty much non-existent. So that's definitely something that's going to need a lot of courage from institutions. But again, it's really tricky because all the actors are judged on the maximization of revenues. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely something that's going to have to change, but it's not going to take. It's going to take a while, in my opinion.
If I just continue with you there, you talked about financialization of football. Do you see growing future risks to further financialization of football?
Yeah, football is attractive for several reasons. First, because it proved during the crisis that it was pretty much crisis-proof, because the revenues pretty much were stable, and they got up right after the crisis, which is interesting for investors because in their diversification strategy, they have a lot of industries that are really not crisis-proof. So football was a good sector to diversify, and so Americans are very interested in clubs at the moment. Investing in a European club is a really little amount of the whole money they have, so they don't take it. It's very risky, but the return on investment can be good, and they invest in good clubs. They invest in leagues that are well regulated, so they don't do it on. It's not it's a real strategy. So the financialization is not over, of course, but my opinion is that institutions and clubs and everybody and players should wonder if any kind of money put into football is good. If the answer is yes, the financialization is going to go on, and it's going to be more and more difficult to control and to regulate. But it's again, who wants less money in football? No, it's not an easy question.
Yeah, Daniel, you're obviously here today, and you were mentioned there as a member of the board at UEC. What is it about UEC that you think makes it the appropriate or best forum to address these kind of governance concerns in European football?
Well, I think, like leading on, I think, you know, Jean-François is right in terms of the philosophical questions, but I think, to me anyway, you know, I think you look at European football at the moment, and it's much like the climate crisis, I suppose, in that you basically, if you ignore the overall football ecosystem and you just focus on, you know, the potential benefits of a tiny number of clubs, you're going to destroy the whole system. And you're probably not going to realise you've destroyed the whole system until it's too late, which is obviously the similarity maybe with climate. And I think that right now you have an organisation that is the sole representative body, and as I've outlined, you know, the Irish League will never form any part of any discussion really, or have any, you know, stakeholder status worth speaking about, as will many other leagues. And you know, the aims of the UEC, the structure, the one member, one vote, you know, it aligns with the European model. I think that it's the correct model, and you know, I think it allows people to kind of highlight issues before they arise, and to solve them in a collaborative process. Because if we continue as we are now, and we've, you know, there's so many issues being highlighted, and this is just the first panel discussion, I think we're ignoring the fact that you know, you can't measure football's health by just looking at a tiny percentage of clubs. You've got to look at the overall picture, and I think that the UEC enables that to happen in a fair process, a transparent way, and for the UEC to be recognised by UEFA and to have a voice at the table can only be beneficial for all of football, not just for the clubs who are members of the UEC.
And I'll come to Fran with the same question. What is it about the UEC that you think is, you know, will be the most positive development to it entering the European football landscape?
Well, I think that what we have to think about is the fact that 20 years ago, the football structures in Europe were completely different. 20 years ago, you could make decisions on a European competition level because the teams who didn't participate or rarely participated in those competitions weren't really affected. But I think at the moment, the voice of you know, a smaller team with less financial resources should be listened to. So I think it's essential that we understand that all the teams who are part of European leagues, we should all be listened to. And what is clear that as opposed to the reason of setting up the UEC, which is a democratic association, and everybody who is a member have one member, one vote. It's all democratic. So I think the association is good as opposed to other organizations like the ECA that are just organized by very few elite teams. So the fact that you're listened to and you're taken into account, I think is essential to have a voice, a vote, and to be able to make sure that the organizations like UEFA listen to us, and we need to be able to reach out to them. And so, as we said before, it's not just us, but also FIFPro, which is the players' union. It's very important that we are listened to. And then going back to the approach that Jean-François said, it's true that it's very complicated to put limits on where the where the money comes from, but you can put a limit on the actual amount of money, because if we put a salary cap for each team has a budget. So what it means is that you are supervising the fact that they spend the money correctly. So if the expenses are supervised and they're checked, independent where it comes from, they can only spend the limit that is set by the organizations. And this means that the competition will be more equal. And so it's not just a race. Like the more money you put in, the more possibilities you have of winning. So I think we will have to all compete, but with the same resources.
Jean-François, Fran has mentioned salary cap a couple of times. We will discuss this, I think, again in a later panel. But just to come to you on that, do you see that as a legitimate idea for trying to rebalance parts of European football that have become distorted?
Yeah, of course. What I would advise is because when the money is in clubs, then it's very difficult to control how the clubs are using it. My first idea about salary cap is it's a great idea. How you can control it, makes it very difficult for me to advise it. I would advise institutions to control where the money comes from, who is owning the clubs, and then it's going to be way easier to control how they use it. Because we have a salary cap in rugby in France, in a rugby league, because they're the best league in the world, so it made sense to use a salary cap. And even among 14 clubs, everybody knows that some clubs cheat. Because they use players are paid by sponsors, players are paid by companies in abroad, etc., etc. And it's 14 clubs in rugby. The owners are known. It's supposed to be very easy. So, from this example, if I extrapolate to European football, controlling salary cap is going to be impossible. That's just my opinion. So I'm totally philosophically for it, promoting it, but I don't think it's going to be possible, in my opinion. For bad reasons, of course.
Daniel, if I come back to you, are there other specific ideas, solutions that we haven't yet talked about that you would recommend, that you'd like to see in place across European football?
I just think that like I've highlighted it several times, but I think we can get into the fact that there's possible solutions. But I think before you come to solutions, you have to recognise that there's a problem. And I think, you'd have to be crazy to not think there's a problem at the moment, that a body like this shouldn't exist, that a body like this couldn't bring huge positives. And a body like the UEC ultimately will then suggest solutions on a collaborative basis. So I have ideas, but they're just my own ideas. And I think when you speak to other leagues and recognise the ecosystem as a whole, then you get people, like-minded people who want the good for the whole game. Also bring leagues together, smaller leagues who maybe face similar problems. I'm sure the problems that we face are mirrored in other leagues of a similar size. And then you can present solutions on a basis that it's done collaboratively, and with people ultimately who have a say and just are a voice in the decision-making process. And with that totally devoid, we can have discussions like this and they're useful and we can propose them. But unless we really have an outlet for solutions, they'll never come to the places they should be. And they'll never be discussed in the forums and the rooms they should be discussed in. So I'd kind of go back to my previous point. I think the health of the ecosystem as a whole is not being considered, and we're measuring at very small levels. The success or otherwise of football. The success of football in Europe should be based upon all clubs and all leagues growing together. And of course, the bigger clubs, and inverted commas, the ones who play regularly in European competition, they'll always have greater resources. They should get greater prize money. But that shouldn't mean that others have no voice and they should accept what these clubs give to them. It's wrong on every level. And I think that, once we accept that that's wrong, then we can propose solutions together to how we can correct all kinds of issues.
You pointed specifically in an earlier answer to the 3.4 million euros for qualifying for UEFA club competitions. Is that something you would do something different with, distribute the money differently if you were in charge?
Yeah, and I think when you look at something like that, if there's one club and the stats are all there. So for Ireland, we know the team who win the league should qualify. It's still a competition; they can lose unexpectedly, and we know that the other three clubs won't get beyond the third round. There's statistics there; it's not going to happen. We've gotten to the third round in 2021. We were beaten by PAOK of Greece, and that's as far as we could go. So in a league like ours, I think you should look at that and balance out the turnover of the league versus the potential prize money, which is enormous in the league context, and have a fairer distribution model within that league. And that's not to take away from the team who's won the league, but it's to protect the health of the overall league. So again, that's just one possibility. That's my own opinion. But if we speak, with more clubs, in environments like this and through the UEC, maybe that there's a number of leagues who face that exact issue, and it would create a fairer ecosystem in that league alone, and prevent financial imbalance, but also prevent. The issue now we have is that the potential reward is so high, and everyone knows that if one team does this a couple of times, they've put themselves in a position that they're nearly untouchable, that you're going to have people overspend to try and ensure that this doesn't happen, which again puts clubs in jeopardy. We've had numerous clubs in our league, thankfully never our own, but who've gone out of business, who've reformed, chasing a dream, and the carrot is so big in the context of the league that's it's just not right. For the league as a whole. So that's one suggestion. But again, if we have a UEC with a voice with UEFA, we can discuss these with similar leagues and propose solutions together.
Yeah. Jean-François, on that same point, what's your view of how the ecosystem widely is being sort of regulated at the moment?
Well, again, we've been talking about the power that ECA has and the influence they had on the decisions made by UEFA in the last years, and that's definitely undeniable, if you ask me. So we have big clubs that want to take a large share of the revenues generated, and that's going to continue as long as they are not regulated. And this initiative is, in my opinion, a very good, is going in the right direction, giving a voice to other clubs, because football cannot be only considered as 20, 30 clubs in Europe. Back to the discussion that we had, I think that if we want to work on the sustainability of the model, the salary cap is a good idea, but just putting a cap on the ratio that clubs spend on players compared to what they're making would be great, because so far, whenever the revenues of the clubs go up, pretty much everything goes in the players' pockets. So I'm not against players making money, but clubs should have an impossibility for them to spend more money on players and to work on infrastructure, on other services of the club, and that would be something that I would recommend to any kind of league in Europe, and that would definitely be a way to make their business a little bit more sustainable.
I'll give the last word to Fran here on this panel. Is there something that you would suggest? You know, you talked about salary cap a bit. Is there any other specific suggestions you would have for how, you know, maybe to address some of these governance issues which you guys have identified?
Well, what we have to be very clear about is that we have a clear governance problem. That's no question about that whatsoever. So when a very small number of teams represent 1% of the teams decide on the calendar, on how the money is going to be distributed, among other things. So probably, I don't think we're just talking about something that's social justice. I think that's something that is a very clear lack of balance. And as a summary, just to bring this to an end, I think the salary cap, well applied, would work. We're an example at La Liga, because a few years ago, a lot of the teams had a lot of, you know, debts with the treasury and with national insurance and even with their players. But that came to an end because that's part of our past. And why did we do that? Because we had a very strong, strict and governance, and we had salary caps there, or the amount that we could spend on the wage bill. So I think at the moment that we're all playing in Europe and we need to take all these things into account. So what we need to do is to have rules and regulations that are agreed by all, and the big teams that participate that, as well as the small teams. And these regulations would allow lots of different things, because if we set a salary cap, what we're going to find is that we have the possibility that the salaries will be sort of be reasonable. So we're not the salaries are not just going up, and the transfers will be reasonable, and we're not just inflating all the time all our expenses. And I think what is essential too is that we can only do this if we are listened to, and that we need to have a voice, and we need to have the support from the sports institution and from the political institutions too.
We have to interrupt maybe this first panel. Thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you to all of you. Jean-François, Fran, and Daniel. So before moving to the second panel, I would like to make 2 or 3 remarks, if I may. What I heard here is things positive, like the recognition of the diversity of club is important. Every club brings a valuable contribution to hold the system. And second thing I heard from our president, Ibán García del Blanco, is the defense of what we call here in Brussels the European model of sport, which is characterized by a pyramidal organization. This is crucial. This is one thing that we defend with sport citizenship, a promotion relegation system, because the fan have to believe in the sincerity of the sport and the football in particular, okay? And if they don't, the whole market would collapse. So we have to guarantee this uncertainty of sport. And the European model sports is also based on financial solidarity between all the clubs, professional and amateur sport. cannot forget at the bottom of the pyramid the role of amateur sport. So that's an introduction to the second panel. I would like to call Matteo Zacchetti, who is representing the European Commission. I've heard you are a specialist of professional sport within the sports unit. I've been working a long time, many years with the sports unit, and I know you are committed to really deliver the European model of sport, which has been described by our MEP. Thank you so much, Matteo. I'll leave my...
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Katarina and Dennis, for this invitation and this opportunity to speak to a crowd of football people. So basically, the fact that you are all football people saves me from telling you who Bill Shankly was. I think you all know him. So he said once that some people think football is a matter of life and death. I don't like that attitude, he said. I can assure them it's much more serious than that. So this is to basically introduce and say that football is a precious thing for European citizens and for Europe. European football is known and followed worldwide. It is very important under many aspects from an economic, social, cultural point of view. And I always say that, I mean, of course it's different, but in a way it's a bit like what Hollywood was and is for the US. It's a sort of business card of Europe. So this means that its destiny has to be handled with care, and decisions about its future have to be taken in the most inclusive possible way. So if we know, I mean, the European sport model has been mentioned several times today already. We know that UEFA is at the top, sorry, of the so-called pyramidal structure. But all stakeholders, including national FAs, leagues, clubs, coaches, players, and fans, need to have their say and play their role. A better and fairer ecosystem, a higher degree of sustainability, and a more leveled playing field would be beneficial for European football. And it would emphasize the importance of the sporting merits, which is another pillar of the European sport model. So this panel is about governance models. And we know that, again, referring to the European sport model, good governance is the prerequisite for the autonomy of sport, the specificity of sport. So I think the definition of good governance is an evolving one. But both the Commission and Parliament have produced documents in the past talking about good governance. And for example, we had an expert group on good governance. And I think there are some elements that are important when we define good governance. For example, a clarity of purpose, a vision, a code of ethics, the identification and involvement of all stakeholders, a democratic and transparent organization and democratic procedures, an appropriate judicial and disciplinary system. And finally, I mean, other people have made reference to that, inclusivity, diversity, and I would add engagement with youth. So in this context, I think that a representation of the interests and position of all clubs, including those of mid and small sizes, and from all corners of Europe, which very often are the real backbone of many domestic leagues, is a very good news, I think. You know, the Commission, in its stakeholders dialogue exercise, welcomed this initiative in April this year. And Vice President Skinas intervened in your launch event here in Brussels. But I think even before we had established quite a constructive dialogue with you. And of course, we will follow how UEC will develop and how representative is and it will be. representativity is, of course, the key. We all know that there are several challenges ahead for European football. People before me have mentioned many of them. I mean, this panel will mention other. Just let me say that I think, of course, a better financial sustainability is one of them. So a business model that is more sustainable financially, with a system that is effective, as it was remembered. I mean, philosophically, there are many ideas on how to implement this financial sustainability, a better financial, a more sustainable financial model, but they have to be also easily implemented. They have to be controlled, must be checks, and there must be sanctions also if those rules are not respected. Also because I think a better financial sustainability would lead also to a more to work on the competitive balance, a better competitive balance, which I think has been for many years the key of success of European football. So this is how, at the end, how everybody can dream of competing at the highest level. So let me close this brief intervention by saying that the Commission is here and will be there to facilitate the processes and support stakeholders by fostering dialogue and, of course, to support and promote the interventions of everybody, the inclusivity, the interventions of all stakeholders in the future, in the vision of a future European football. So again, let me thank you for this opportunity, and I'm really curious to hear what this panel will have to say on governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo. So now I call Miguel Maduro, who is professor of law at the Católica Global School of Law in Lisbon.
If I can jump in here, Miguel is running a little bit late.
Okay.
He will be here soon, but we will kick things off with Katarina and Maksims.
So you're lucky to hear two of them.
We will start off with two, and I'm sure it'll go fine. And Miguel will be here very soon. So for this second panel, I'd like to welcome Katarina Pijetlovic, the General Secretary of the UEC and Associate Professor of Law at the Global School of Law in Lisbon. Welcome. And Maksims Krivunecs, President of Latvia's Virslīga, and also Maksims is a board member at the European Leagues. He also said I could call him Max, so I'm going to do that for the rest of the panel. Katarina, can I start with you here? I wondered whether you think domestic leagues and clubs who don't participate in European competitions are currently adequately represented in the decision-making process in European football.
We wouldn't be here if they were. There would be no need. Right. So we wouldn't be here if they were adequately represented. There would be no need for the UEC. To answer this question in details, if you want to read the letter that we have published a few weeks ago, it's on our social media. You have basically 10 pages explaining perfectly the answer that I was just asked. But I will summarize it here in a very few points. And first of all, it doesn't hurt to mention that the current body that represents football clubs in Europe, ECA, is led by chairman, the president of one of the richest European clubs, who is also a CEO of Bein Sports Channel, a major client of UEFA, and that buys rights from UEFA, while at the same time he sits on the executive committee of UEFA and deciding on what kind of deals these are going to be made. So it's a major conflict of interest. Secondly, the ECA has a strict hierarchy of membership. First, we have, there are 3 levels essentially. First, we have network members that don't have any right to vote at all. We have associated members which now, after 15 years, gain the right to vote, but it's completely powerless because their right to vote is for the positions in the board that have no right to vote on the board. So there is no right to vote essentially for associated members either. They can just sit on the board as observers and vote for those places that, in fact, are just observing. So these two categories, network and associated members, may get some services that ECA might offer them, but as Dennis said, you know, these services are basically, I mean, the reasons that they even exist is to keep the clubs complacent. It's to mitigate the damage created by ECA's own existence. And the network and associated members, therefore, just basically give legitimacy and cover for the ECA's real objectives, and that is to protect the supremacy of elite clubs in the governance, and the supremacy in the governance and the right to decide means supremacy on the field and financial supremacy as well. It's automatic. It consolidates that supremacy. So the governance is massively important as to what is actually happening in financial world economically and on the sporting pitch. So there's a category called ordinary members. There's 137 of them, and they have a full right to vote. Which brings me to my final point, and that is the structure of the ECA board and the fact that wealthy clubs, elite clubs, have so much more powerful votes because ordinary members coming from the top 6 national associations, and if I can get a chart to actually illustrate this, maybe it's going to be easier. So the 24 board places are the only ones that have right to vote in ECA. Out of those 24, 12 go to the clubs coming from the top 6 national associations. And the bottom 27 national associations are represented only by 2 places on the board. And then you have members from associations 7 to 15 having 6 places. And right now, after having simple majority for 15 years, where elite clubs could easily basically obtain majority, right now they have qualified majority, and for qualified majority you need 18 votes, which is exactly the number of the subdivision 1 and subdivision 2 clubs on the board. So that is the problem. This structure is not democratic. It is based on wealth, entirely based on wealth, and there's a word for it, we call it plutocracy. And all this means is that 92% of the clubs, professional clubs in European football, are either unrepresented or they're inadequately represented. I mean, these clubs are never going to vote to change the system because it suits them. They're national champions. They have won, 10 out of last 10 or 15 national leagues, so why would they want to change anything? They massively benefit from the system. So the entire ECA setup is just a cover, basically, for undemocratic membership and board structures, and the fact that the governance of the organization is really in the hands of elite and run for elite.
I'm just going to stick with you for the next question. You said 92% of European pro clubs are excluded, in your opinion, from the decision-making process. What do you think caused the structures to develop in that way over time?
Right. There is a book. I wrote a book on that. You can read it. So it's a long story. But sometime
if you can summarize the book in short form.
But for the 60-second summary of that, in 1998, elite clubs who were then in an economic interest group called G14, those were the top 18 most powerful European clubs, they realized that a threat of breakaway and litigation can really get them far with the governing body. It's a powerful weapon, really, to get what they want, because every time they threaten to break away or to litigate, what happened is that UEFA, in an attempt to keep the pyramid together, was basically blackmailed into giving more places to these elite clubs in their committees, more places for the big five in the competitions. They reformatted the Champions League to suit them. The money redistribution, everything went their way. So they realized every time we want something, we can threaten to break away, or we can threaten with litigation. So that's why we have the rules today that we see that are completely, that make no sense, such as, how the money is redistributed in the group stages of Champions League according to the size of TV markets where the clubs come from and according to the historic coefficient, instead of sporting performance being the sole the criteria. So anyways, if you look at what caused all of this, it's the breakaway threats and the threats of litigation that ultimately created ECA from G14, because G14 then absorbed the European Club Forum, which was a more representative body of about 100 clubs at the time, and they created ECA out of it. Now this broader membership has given them legitimacy, and it has given them basically just reinstitutionalized G14. And why I say this is because if you looked back then, in 2018 when ECA was formed, if you looked at the executive board, you could see that it's a majority G14 members. And it's not really changed after the reforms, as you can see. These major reforms that were announced, there's some major change, that was that board. So still, the governance is very, very firmly in the grip of elite clubs.
Welcome, Miguel. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to hit you with a question straight away now that you're here. To what extent do you think the current structures of European football governance represent all the stakeholders?
Well, thank you. First, apologies for the delay. As you know, there was a mix-up. I was told that was the other Thon Hotel in Brussels, so I was waiting there.
I don't think you were the only one who also went first to the other Thon Hotel.
Apologies for that, for being late. Let me answer your question. First, we need to identify who we believe are the stakeholders, and what stakeholders, therefore, should have a voice in the processes of governance of football in Europe. And I think there are several dimensions to that problem that lead me to the answer being no, they are not all represented. I think there's definitely a gap in terms of representation of fans, for example. Though it's difficult, we should work towards develop mechanisms that guarantee that fans have some kind of voice in the process of governance of football in Europe. There is a gap even within the existent mechanisms of representation based on football associations in terms of the diversity to which that representation takes place. So, for example, women are severely underrepresented in the mechanisms of governance of sports and football in particular. Less than 2% of the leadership positions of football are occupied by women, and we could go on. So that's another problem, the problem of diversity within the stakeholders that are supposed to be represented. And then there's an additional problem with respect to the clubs themselves and the quality of representation and, again, the extent of diversity of the interests that different clubs have in terms of the mechanisms of representation. ECA is a good example because ECA basically dominates, is supposed to represent all clubs in Europe. But in fact, if you look, I mean, any lawyer looking at the statutes of ECA and its mechanisms of selection, both in terms of membership and then in terms of voting power and presence in its main governing bodies, makes clear that that is geared towards representing only certain types of clubs that have interests that are not necessarily coincidental, not to say, in many instances, strikingly different or opposed to the interests of other clubs that have a much lower voice in the process. I mean, if I would want to make a comparison to how ECA works with what a national parliament will be in terms of representation, will be the same thing as saying that in parliament, people will be elected on the basis of certain numbers of positions for Parliament be given with respect to the wealth of people. So the top 5% wealthiest in the country will get a certain number of positions. The other 10-15% will get another number of positions, and the other one a certain number of positions, and the other one a number of positions. But in addition to that, the decision-making processes in Parliament will make it so that no decision will be taken basically without the approval of the top 5 richest people in the country. I think we will all find that troubling in terms of how a democracy should work, and certainly that such a parliament will not represent in an inclusive way all the interests, because by definition these different groups will have different interests. So sorry if I took a little bit more time, but I think I wanted to give a more complete answer.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I'll come to Max with the next one. From your viewpoint in Riga, what is the main problem you identify with European football governance, and what would be the effect of that issue in practice, like affecting you guys in the Latvian league?
Yeah, sure.
And maybe also, you're also the European League's board member, how it kind of affects things on a more continental basis.
Well, of course, we can see the governance issue in European football from many perspectives, and I will make it from the league's perspective and the professional club's perspective. The issue lies in the exclusion of the majority of the professional clubs in Europe from the decision-making process, despite the fact that these decisions directly influence these clubs. And obviously, the system in which there is more than 1,500 professional clubs is quite difficult to manage, and it's challenging to represent all interests in a fair way. However, the most effective solution that addresses these issues was the establishment of the leagues. So the league is actually holds the function of clubs association in the particular UEFA member territory, right? So as far as I know, all the top division clubs across Europe, they enjoy the same voting power, right? And for example, in Virslīga we have 10 clubs. All disregarding their size have the same voting rights, and the board and I, as the president of the league, is legally recognized as the representative of these clubs. If we extend this principle to all championships and to all professional leagues across Europe, we will find out that the number of these representatives is not so big not to be included in the decision-making process. The issue is that actually we, as the representatives of the leagues, are excluded from this process. And for example, within the UEFA Executive Committee, we see that there are 2 seats reserved for the ECA, European Club Association, whereas for the European leagues, which is the association of 39 leagues representing more than 1,000 leagues, there is only 1 seat. Furthermore, the ECA, as was already mentioned here, the ordinary members of the ECA, they represent a tiny fraction of all professional clubs in Europe. And they are selected on a UEFA club coefficient criteria, which makes this sample pre-selected. And of course, the pre-selected sample cannot represent the entire population. And this skewed positioning is also extends to other things. For example, UEFA Club Competition, which is a really important committee, Club Competitions Committee, where there is 21 members, out of them 1 represented by the European leagues, and 16 members are represented by individual ECA clubs. So if you say, for example, Latvian clubs that are also present here, whether they delegated their right to represent them to the ECA in these committees, obviously the answer would be no. And I think that the pre-selected sample is biased, perpetuate bias, and is skewed in this positioning, which cannot represent the whole spectrum of European football interest. And of course, by excluding small and medium teams, clubs from this process, we shut the door on a wealth of innovative ideas and valuable experiences. And in many, many cases, these clubs excel in resource management and talent management. For example, here there's also a representative from Latvia, FC Meta. This is by far the best academy structure in Latvia, the club that is playing more than 10 years in Latvia but have never reached higher the 5th place. So, and the voice of this club is not represented in any of these organizations. So to conclude, our goal should not revolve only about determining how to distribute the billions of euros among a group of clubs participating in UEFA club competitions. So the statutes of UEFA emphasizes objectives that tells us about the full or wider football development in all UEFA territories, and it's meaning promoting solidarity, developing infrastructure, promoting youth and women football, as well as also experience for the fans. And I believe that, first of all, yes, there are some clubs that are bringing more value to the ecosystem, but it should not serve as a primary basis in determining the share of decision-making process for these stakeholders. I believe that every member, every club should have the equal opportunity to be represented and equal opportunity to benefit from the system, collective system, from domestic and international competitions together.
I'll just stay with you for the next question, Max. So you've identified this exclusion as maybe the most significant issue, governance issue in European football. What do you think the specifics, or what would your solutions be to that issue? And do you have a practical way that they might be implemented? And if you can keep the answer fairly brief, that would be.
Yes, first of all, the UEFA needs to recognize that ECA is not a solely representative of the professional clubs, and we can do it only through the national associations, which are the members of the UEFA. And there are two emerging options. First of all, the clubs should be represented either through direct democratic form via clubs associations like UEC, where is one club, one vote, or it could be indirect democratic form via representations through the leagues representative.
Okay. I'll come to you next, Miguel, and again, I'll stress that we need to be fairly succinct because we've got a little bit left to get through here on this panel. What do you think the thing that could trigger broad change in European football governance is?
Well, that's a broader
when it comes to representation of
when
clubs.
it comes to representation of clubs, I argue, I agree, by the way, with this idea that you need either to change the mechanism. Either you reform ECA and make it more inclusive and more egalitarian, or then you have more than one organization. ECA becomes an elite clubs, what is perfectly, legitimate for there to be an elite club organization, and then you have other organizations that have at least equal voice in the process that represent other clubs' interests. How will this happen? How will reforms trigger? I'm honestly convinced that genuine reforms in terms of governance of football and sports in general, I've been writing about this for some time now, will only happen from the outside. I'm very, very pessimistic. I had an experience for 10 months, some of you might know, as president of the governance committee of FIFA after the scandals of 2015. We were supposed to be those that were going to monitor and help implement the reforms. And my experience there and everything I've seen after that tells me that without being imposed from the outside, it's very unlikely. Like any it's a cartelized system of power. And like any cartel, they never reform themselves. They have to be reformed from the outside. What can be the trigger for this? I'm convinced that actually I've just written an article recently about the forthcoming Super League judgment of the Court of Justice. I think that ultimately might trigger the regulatory reforms that are necessary. By the way, I'm not in favor of replacing the autonomy of regulation of sports by a system that is regulated by public authorities. That's not what I'm arguing. What I argue is that the exercise of that regulatory autonomy needs to be subject to certain principles of good governance and to certain principles that guarantee the fundamental aspects of the European sports model. And that needs to be monitored and imposed from the outside, so that the exercise of that regulatory autonomy needs to be made accountable and needs to be subject to some form of public scrutiny. Okay, that's a different thing. How that may happen, as I said, I think the judgment of the Court of Justice, paradoxically and contrary to what many seem to expect, might trigger that, and might trigger in a way that may shock you. I'm going to go on a limb here, making this thing. I think things will get worse before they get better. Here I disagree probably with Katarina. I think the judgment of the European Court of Justice will at least, I'm not going to get into the details of the judgment now, what I foresee can be the judgment. I think the judgment of the Court of Justice will at least give sufficient leeway for the Spanish court to decide favorable to the Super League. And I think I anticipate this because of what also the Spanish courts have so far decided on the case. And I think no decision of the Court of Justice on a preliminary ruling, this is a technical point for lawyers, is a decision on the substance of the case. It's basically an interpretation of EU law that then has to be used and applied to the facts of the case by the national court. I think that at the minimum the Court of Justice will not follow the Advocate General in the case. Okay. I think it's not likely for that to happen. But even if it would, even that will give sufficient leeway for the Spanish courts to decide favorably to the Super League. I think that specific outcome is a bad thing, by the way. I'm not a supporter of the Super League at all. But paradoxically, it may turn out to be a good thing because it may force the EU political process to then have to intervene and legislate to basically say, well, we recognize that in order to protect the European sports model, there needs to be a regulation that could be, for example, even attributed to UEFA, recognize that, but at the same time that recognizes it subject to certain conditions of representation of clubs, of representation of leagues, of representation of football associations. So use that as an opportunity to regulate the model. Because if we don't do that, by the way, I think we'll have serious problems because the litigation before the Court of Justice will continue to succeed. Different parties will choose different national courts to bring cases for the Court of Justice. And the overall framing and regulation, regulatory reform that is necessary to be done in football cannot be done through courts. I mean, courts only decide specific cases. To expect the Court of Justice to be able to come up with all the problems, I mean, think about the Super League. The court first has to decide, is a private entity in a position, should the private entity be recognized the power to license other economic actors in its market? It's very complicated without a public endorsement and without any public framework. I mean, the previous cases that the court had were cases where no such public, where there existed such public framework. That is, where there are national laws that give that power to a private entity. In this case, it's not so. And then it needs to set up, if it authorizes that, what are the conditions, and who is going to monitor those conditions? Who is monitoring if UEFA can say no to the Super League because they don't comply with the objectives of promotion, relegation of the European sports model? Who is monitoring if UEFA itself is complying with the principles of the European sports model? I think it's no longer complying. That's my view. So how can it claim the power to prevent others from acting because they're violating the principles if no one is controlling, if UEFA itself is promoting those principles? I think this is why we need a public regulatory framework. Only the EU, in my view, can offer that. And maybe the Super League judgment will end up providing that. And I know I'm being polemic.
It sounds like something we should continue to talk about bilaterally later. For now, I'll come back to Katarina, just to maybe wrap up with a couple of thoughts. You know, we've talked a bit about the problems that have been identified by Miguel, by Maksims. I wondered what you saw as the solutions going forward, whether that's triggered by something like the Court of Justice's Super League judgment or something else? What do you want to see going forward?
I think, Miguel, we don't disagree, actually. I do think that perhaps reasoning of the Advocate General in Super League was not something court will follow, but I think the outcomes and the conclusions will be followed, and that UEFA will retain its regulatory authority to issue those licenses under specific certain conditions. So just to settle this, a little issue about disagreement, we don't actually disagree too much on anything. To answer the question, the solutions going forward are, the problem starts from governance, so the solutions should be related to governance. And the part of solution in that case, the big and major part of the solution, in addition to perhaps what Professor Maduro said about public supervision of how the private regulatory monopolies exercise their powers, would be, in fact, change in the governance. Good governance is a part of EU policy, a part of EU law. It's not just something that we desire. It is there, and the only thing is how to, in fact, enforce this. By the way, the Super League was not really connecting it back to governance. It was not an accident. It did develop out of those undemocratic structures where, through the governance, the top clubs have managed to create more and more wealth gap, and that has become so big, that gap, that they have become too big and much better than everybody else, and they thought, well, why do we need all of these other clubs? We are so much better. We are going to take the ball and go home. And that was basically created and enabled by exactly the structures that existed in the ECA. And now 9 out of those 12 Super League clubs are back in the ECA and are back on the ECA board with full voting rights, while still being in the shareholder agreement of Super League. They're still a part of that share. They still didn't step out. Only one club stepped out. So just let that sink in for a second. For me, to summarize, the solution would be to do what many other industries do, be honest, and simply say that ECA represents elite clubs, be honest about it, and represent elite clubs. We will represent the rest. It's done in many industries. It works well. It is impossible for instance, one organization to support equally and to pursue the objectives and protect the interest of Latvian clubs that have completely different interests from the very top elite clubs. And if you look at then the structures of ECA, whose interests are they protecting? It is impossible, because Latvian clubs would want more solidarity, elite clubs would want less solidarity. Latvian clubs would want more access to the European competition, and the top clubs would want it, but only for themselves. And so on. So there are completely opposing interests, which just makes one organization incapable, in a practical terms, to represent all these competing interests, opposing, not competing, completely opposite interests. So the solution would be to split the governance of, or the representation, of the clubs between ECA and the UEC, and simply make it an honest approach. And just to clarify, we never really wanted to replace ECA. We think that elite clubs deserve representation, and ECA is, in fact, their organization. So let's just not pretend that we are representing all the clubs, because they are not.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very enlightening discussion with great perspective from various different positions there. So thank you all very much. And I'll hand back over now to Laurent.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the high-level debate. We have to move to the third panel. I think, Alex, you are here. We start where the moderator left. You come back for the third one, please? 2 seconds? Okay. Thank you so much. So I think that has been said that the representative of Tel Aviv club is not there, so we have to tell our solidarity to the Tel Aviv club and to all the people from Israel in this tragic period. So now for the third panel, where is my moderator coming? Alex Muzio, okay, from a very well-known Union Saint-Gilloise club, which is a top club in Belgium, which is maybe one of the most relevant brand of football now in Belgium, where I'm living. Please take place. And Steve Parish, chairman of Crystal Palace, English club, Premier League. You're coming? And I think I have to join the panel to replace maybe the representative of Tel Aviv club. We lost our moderator, but we can start if you want. He's coming. Thank you. Pardon. Ça va?
A short presentation about competitive balance, which is the topic that our panelists will discuss. So there are many ways to measure competitive balance in European football, just like there are many ways to measure inequality in economy. But I have chosen two simple ways to show how things have evolved over the last 30 years. So first, looking at what happens inside domestic leagues in Europe. This table that you can see here, it shows how many points per game the top 3 teams have scored in each league. I think it's at least the top 30 leagues over a period of 10 years in the last decade and 30 years ago as a comparison point. And what we see is that there are more leagues today that are dominated by just a few clubs, a small number of teams, with the same teams finishing top of the league every season. And also when they do finish top of the league, they tend to win more games today than they used to 30 years ago. So this is inside domestic leagues. Now, if we look at the second aspect of competitive balance, which is what happens between leagues, here you can see the number of teams outside the so-called Big Five leagues, or Big Five markets, I should say probably, to have reached the last 8, the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Now, of course, there have been changes in format, in the access system of these competitions. Less teams from outside the top 5 leagues have started in the group stage of these competitions, but still, what we see is that every decade, a lower percentage of these clubs make it to the last rounds and can actually compete with the best clubs in Europe. So competitive balance has decreased both at the top of domestic leagues and at a more global level between leagues. Another way to describe the trend is to say that sporting mobility has decreased, which can make competitions less interesting but also less fair. Now, competitive balance is highly correlated with financial inequalities between clubs, which again can be measured in many ways. But if we look at the evolution of, on the next slide, of the share of the total revenue of European club football that has been received by the 10 richest clubs and see how that evolved over 30 years, we see that it's not linear, but there's a clear trend again. And the last 10 years have been the worst ever in the history of European club football. Now, a lot of factors can explain this concentration of wealth. On the next slide, we can see that the main one we will focus on today is the impact of UEFA club competitions. We've talked a lot about UEFA competitions already. In fact, the first thing to look at, the revenue generated by UEFA competitions is growing much faster than the rest of the ecosystem, which helps frequent participants increase the financial gap with all other clubs. The new format, which you'll know about, which will be introduced next year, adds more match days, and that is expected to increase revenue by around 25% again. Now, at the moment, it is hard to predict exactly how this new format and the increase will impact all clubs, because there are certain parameters that haven't been publicly announced yet. But what we can do is we can look at the latest important reforms that were introduced in the 2018-21 cycle, which you can see here. So back then, the access system had been changed to allow the top 4 national associations to send 4 guaranteed participants to the group stage. Revenue distribution was also amended to introduce the 10-year coefficient. And the consequence was that the 10 clubs to receive the highest amount from UEFA, they got 48% more than in the previous cycle. And this 48% increase happened in a context of a 9% increase only of the total European football clubs' revenue, which confirms the impact of UCCs. It's not just natural growth, it's some clubs getting more than others. Now, as already mentioned, new changes are coming for the 24-27 cycle. The numbers you can see here are all based on the minimum projections, and it is important to note that solidarity payments for non-participating clubs are going to increase, not only in absolute value, but also as a percentage of the total, going from 4% to 7%. This means that the total amount to be distributed will more than double, going from 140 million euros to 308 as a minimum, again, which is positive for competitive balance, mostly in smaller leagues, because this is where solidarity plays a significant role. And this is a good example of how UEFA club competitions can help instead of pushing things in the wrong direction. But this only addresses one aspect of the problem. Overall, the biggest clubs in Europe are still likely to benefit from the changes, since they don't compete directly against the clubs who depend on solidarity the most. Now, one last thing to mention before I let our participants share their views is that, yes, we've been talking a lot about UEFA competitions, but UEFA competitions are not the only source generating inequality in European football. Domestic media rights and their distribution play an important role, just like commercial rights, which are actually the most concentrated source of revenue. When you look at the detail, it's really the sponsorship rights today that help the big clubs stay where they are. Although these rights are also affected by current and past participation in UEFA competitions. So it is a complex problem, and there are a lot of potential solutions, some of which we've heard already today, that can be applied either at a European or at a domestic level. And I'm curious to hear the perspective of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Thank you, William. Just in case we didn't already get an introduction, I did have to step out for a second. Steve Parish, Chairman at Crystal Palace. Alex Muzio, Chairman at Union Saint-Gilloise here in Belgium. And you've obviously seen Laurent Thieule already, Honorary President of the think tank Sport and Citizenship. Alex, I'll come to you first, and welcome back. Obviously, you were speaking here back in April. Can you talk about this from a Belgian perspective? Competitive balance when it comes to football in Belgium, how have you observed that evolving over time? For the good or for the bad?
Well, first thing to say is that Max mentioned how across all European leagues it's pretty much one club, one vote, apart from in Belgium, where the big teams get 3 votes, the medium teams get 2 votes, and the small teams get 1 vote. So that's an interesting caveat.
Where do you fall in that?
2 at the moment.
2 votes.
Give me a couple of years. But look, it's very similar in the Belgian league as it is in European competitions. We have a coefficient as well that drives revenue towards the teams that finished at the top of the league, rather than rewarding current performance. We have, there's plenty of similarities, and I take something that Steve said the other day, which I think is very insightful, which is that we're optimizing on the wrong thing. In general, we're optimizing on the financial side when sport is not supposed to be solely about the financial side. If anything, quite the opposite. And that is replicated in Belgium the same as it is in European competitions.
Steve, when it comes to the subject of competitive balance, how do you feel that is represented in the English Premier League? It's a very broad question to start, but...
Yes, I mean, look, competitive balance, when we talk about elite clubs, this is the thing that interests me. Even the acceptance in here that there should be a body that represents elite clubs. I mean, in a way, they've only become elite clubs because of the ability to distort the competitive balance. The presenter touched upon the getting into Europe garners you greater commercial revenues, and fine, that was okay when we all started from a level playing field, and you could all get into Europe, and then you could all build your commercial revenues into a broader audience. But now it's much harder, certainly in the Premier League, to get into Europe. And even if you get there 1 year, you receive a fraction of the money of the clubs that have been there more regularly because of the coefficient. So the system is built in to get us all to believe that there's a group of clubs that will always be bigger than all of us, that they're completely unassailable, and we just simply all have to accept that that's the way it is. In the Premier League, obviously, people think that we're incredibly fortunate with the money we have, and I guess it brings a lot of benefits. But as I said in the last session, all things are relative. You know, we spend more money on the same quality of players often. A lot of the money does trickle down to the ecosystem. We spend around 2 billion of the 3.3 million of media money every year in transfer fees. An enormous amount that goes into the European ecosystem. So in our league, really is a two-speed league. They're the teams at the top that benefit from being in Europe, having played in Europe a lot. Now, with a partial pull-up of the drawbridge with the coefficient, the ability to pretty much make sure that they always play in Europe every year. So I think the problem comes back to, Miguel, I think, was the one who hit on it the most. To get to the root of the problem for me, really you have to go on the UEFA website and look at their mission statement. And their mission statement is all about growing the game and looking after national associations and promoting things like the women's game. I can't find anywhere on there where it says that their mission is to grow the biggest and best football tournament across Europe and garner the most possible media money and give it to as few clubs as possible. I can't find that on their website. And it seems to me that if you just simply had a separation of the people that are supposed to be regulating and governing the game for the benefit of everybody and the people that are supposed to be organising tournaments, then you would get a better system. It's as simple as that. The two should simply not be intertwined. And while they're intertwined, and then, as we've seen, they allow themselves to be influenced by a group of clubs that they believe will get them the greatest short-term media payments, then we're always going to be fighting a rearguard action in this situation. So for me, I don't know how it comes about, but in order to go back to the fact where UEFA should be in charge of creating competitions where everybody in this room has a reasonable possibility of laddering up their club and improving their club over a period of time, you would need a separation of the people that run the game. They should be acting in the best interest of the game. That should be their North Star. That should be it. Maybe the only people on their committees and their boards should be other national associations that should help them, advise them in that way. And then there should be something that organises a pan-European tournament, and how much of the calendar that has, how much it interferes with domestic leagues and cup competitions should be decided by that regulatory body that only has the best interest of the game at heart. And that seems to be what we've moved away from. I don't know how we managed to move away from it, but we have. And for me, that's the root of the problem.
Thank you. I'll come back to Alex on the next point. Obviously, your club has been a huge success story over the last few years. Congratulations. How do the UEFA club competitions and entry to them, though, affect your club and the league more broadly in Belgium? We heard a bit about this from Daniel earlier in the first panel. But are there positives? Are there negatives? Is there a balance? What's your view on that?
Well, it has a huge influence. I think you can see the difference in influence is solely based on the size of the league, really. The smaller the league, the larger, the smaller the television rights in that domestic league, the larger the influence on that the European competitions have. Belgium sits somewhere around 8th in the UEFA rankings, but somewhere around 10th in the domestic television rights. So it's very affected. Our turnover last year was over 50% revenue from UEFA competitions. That's obviously an extremely significant amount. The larger Belgian teams, it's also extremely significant. And look, I'm sure we've talked about it before, but the problem is that when you make that competition and you level up your budget, traditionally in sport and in football, the more money you have, the better you do. It's pretty well correlated. It's not perfectly correlated, fortunately, otherwise it'd be pretty boring. But it's correlated, and so you don't have to have been good forever. You have to have been good at a very specific period of time where the graph was showing that the money has gone to a much higher level. Suddenly, if you're good then, you're a bit sticky relative to being good 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, where if you were good, you didn't suddenly have this big revenue boost, and then and you got to stay where you are. There was a lot more flow, there was a lot more movement, there was a lot more sporting merit, I would say, to the process.
Laurent, I'll bring you in here. Obviously, the guys have identified several problems they see with competitive balance in European football. What would you do if you were in charge to address the problems about competitive balance?
Yeah, if I may make a remark, Dennis, if you allow me. Maybe I am here the unique president of football club amateur in Belgium, okay? Which is called the Royal Europa Crinam Football Club in Belgium at 10 minutes from the center of the European quarter. What we do, I need 5 minutes to explain something where I want to go. I want to speak about this European model of sport and this pyramidal organization. You have thousands of amateur clubs at the bottom of the pyramid. If you don't take care of them, you destabilize the pyramid from the top to the down, okay? I take you an example of what we do in our club. I've been sharing the club since, 20 years, and I do everything because you don't have any more volunteers in the club, in Belgium or in France that I know. And I think that we have a social role, you have a social role to play. Whatever the size and the money you have in your different club. In my club in Crinam, which is a club of diversity, we have a total of 300 players, native from 42 different nationalities. It's a club of diversity in Belgium. And what we decided to do 8 years ago was to welcome young refugees and asylum seekers in our club. So since the refugee crisis in 2015, we decided every day to welcome at the club a group of between 5 and 10 boys and girls, native from a country where there is a war, from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from everywhere, from Palestine, from everywhere. And we welcome them at the club, and they play football in the team of our young players. We welcome them, we have table of conversation, and we give them daily, on the base of hospitality, the chance, a piece of chance to succeed in their integration in their new country, which is called Belgium. Why do I say that? It's not to promote my club, which is strongly supported by European Commission since the beginning. We have a lot of funds from UEFA Foundation for Children. I say that because I think that for the size of the club that you represent here, maybe there is an opportunity to be different from the ECA club. The ECA club, they have a rich foundation, okay? But the foundation is doing a social program more in a cosmetic way to show that their image can be different from the one which is criticized at this tribune. But I think at the level of the club you represent here, you have maybe a card to play, is to say, let's commit as partners, stakeholders of amateur club, where they train, they prepare your future player, okay? The problem of our bottom level is that money is everywhere. You have problem of money, all the clubs, amateur, have problem of money. Jean-François Brocard say that money has no smell. That's true. Money is everywhere. And if we speak about the salary gap, we should impose, which is a little bit down in Belgium now with the federation, to stop the increasing level of salaries. You are confronted with this problem. ECA clubs are confronted with increasing level of salaries. But we are victims of the same situation at the local level, in any country you represent here. So think about that, the opportunity of having the privilege and to show you difference with ECA club, you have to take into account the grassroots level of club. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to bring Steve back in here. We talked a little, or William talked a bit about the new format coming in from next year. How do you see that sort of even affecting clubs in the English Premier League or Crystal Palace specifically?
Well, it's affected, I mean, I'm sure it affects every domestic competition. I think you'll see the end of FA Cup replays. The League Cup has already been decimated. We're fighting on 20 teams in the main division. This is the moat that we've tried to protect, because it feels like there's an intent from the world's governing bodies, not just UEFA but from FIFA, to create more competitions that reduce that. I mean, perhaps the best example in a way is the women's game and where the women's game is now. So I think, to echo the point about the game starts at the amateur game and it needs to be deep and broad, if the aim of the global organisations that regulate and manage the sport is in the end for participation, is in the end to make the game as popular as possible, so as many people can play it, enjoy it, watch it, etc., then we have a real problem in the women's game with participation, because the women's game is actually built from the top down in a way that it seems they want the men's game to end up. So it's built from an international play-in side, from almost a European competition play-in side. To be specific, I'm told in England we have a 12-team main domestic league. I'm told it's almost impossible to have more teams because there's no room in the calendar already, because there's so many international games in the women's game, European games. So the load on the players is already so extreme that the drawbridge is done. You can't have more games. Now, the problem of that is, because the professional game and the women's game is so small, and there's lots of towns and places where there's no career for a girl to play football. So, of course, this has an impact. You know, whereas the men's game developed, where every town that could get a crowd was a possible career choice for somebody in that area, there isn't a career choice for a lot of girls in terms of playing football, because there aren't enough professional teams, and there will never be enough professional teams in national countries, because there's so much international football, so much European football. So we have the model that they want, because this is when they could start from a blank sheet of paper. This is what they set up, and it's clearly not good for the basic and most important things that football should be about, is for people to enjoy it, people to have a local club that they can go and watch and they can enjoy. So, you know, I think that it's clear what the problems are. It's clear that we have a situation that is set up to prevent us affecting change. I mean, the word that I used yesterday when I was talking about this is, we are basically disenfranchised from the debate. I mean, we talk about votes. In essence, none of us have any vote in what goes on in European or even global football. We have almost no influence. If you say the European leagues is our only conduit for influence, and all the issues they have, we have almost no influence. So, you know, there's a big job to be done, and I think I would applaud the UEC for trying to do something and to try and create some influence and some change.
Alex, back to you. Do you think the access to UEFA club competitions should be changed, and what would you do if you were you know, in charge of that?
Well, the first point I'd make is that I agree with Daniel that what the most important point of the UEC is that a huge percentage of clubs are unrepresented, and when they come together, then we can have a one club, one vote system, and we can come up with the solutions, you know, rather than personal individual solutions that not everyone's going to end up agreeing with. In terms of the European access from Belgium and from other similar leagues, it's very complicated, because, as Steve alludes to, there's not, you know, you don't want to expand it so that there's more games and taking more away from domestic competitions, but at the same time, making it fewer and making it so that the Champions League was potentially become more stratospheric, where it's only the very, very biggest teams that qualify and no one else does, also doesn't seem like a great solution. So I think personally, in terms of the focus on European competitions, would be that the pillars that they use at the moment of market pull and the coefficient just strike me as completely illogical in every way. You've essentially set something up where, for the market pool, for example, the larger countries that have larger television rights already domestically, they get more money to play in European competitions because of that. It just seems like a massive double count that's creating inequality that doesn't make sense. And then you have the coefficient, which is, I mean, no one can ever explain to me how that could possibly be logical. That the only way that it's possible is that people sat in a room and said, do you know what, one year we just want to get more money because we qualify every year, so how can we make it so we can make more money? Or why don't we introduce something that appears to be merit-based, but it's merit-based on the past? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to any sensible person in my mind that you could possibly enter a competition and receive more money for qualifying for that competition based on what you've done for the years beforehand. So those would be those two changes would be pretty major. And from my point of view, rather than redistributing it solely to, again, starting fees and performance that season, I would want to reward good governance from the clubs that participate, and also increase the solidarity for the teams that don't. And good governance is a perfect example of what Daniel described, that we should all come together and decide what that good governance is. We all know the things that contribute to it, but which ones we focus on and which ones we don't, it should be more of a vote.
I saw Laurent wanted to come in there on that point.
One question. We're talking about the massive needs of money you need to balance your budget, but what is your opinion about the exceptional, amazing inflation of salaries in all the clubs? Will it stop one day or not? From Paris Saint-Germain to l'Union Saint-Gilloise, you are confronted with a competition between you to pay and surpay the salaries of the players. Will it stop one day?
From my point of view, sport has always been the same. As soon as there's more money available, more money goes to the players, and I don't have a problem with that. I think it's a perfectly natural result of a consequence. The only thing that you can do is introduce reforms on a global level, which La Liga have done so that the desire to overspend to perform is controlled. On an individual club basis, you're never going to come together and say, right, we're going to start paying players less. It just automatically means you get worse players, and then you automatically are going to do worse. So it can never be an individual club that will decide, right, we're going to change the system here, we're going to pay players less.
I can guess.
I think that, there's a paradox, isn't there? We're talking about competitive balance. The introduction of 70% squad cost caps, which is where UEFA are moving, obviously that has challenges in terms of it's 70% of turnover and what is a club's turnover. But also, I slightly disagree with Alex on the motivation of the coefficient. I don't think necessarily the motivation was to get those qualifying clubs that regularly qualified more. It was to give the clubs that qualified less regularly less, so that it was much harder for them to ladder up. I think that there's they don't mind the odd occasion that somebody gets into the Champions League unexpectedly, as long as they don't have the temerity to keep qualifying and stay there too long and permanently displace one of the elite. So I think this is really the design of the coefficient. And in some ways, the squad cost caps could have the same effect. So having created an environment where it's much more likely that certain clubs qualify, and even if they don't, it's much more difficult for the club that displaced them to stay there, so much more likely they re-qualified. Then I think they're looking at the value of their clubs. And the value of their clubs isn't optimised as it would be for an NFL club or an NBA club, where their costs are controlled and there's and they have some kind of EBITDA, some kind of cash generation. So then they're looking at these cost caps, which are very much in line with what they spend anyway. They're balanced against 70. 70% is pretty much where they all are, and they know that it's impossible for us to ladder up by only spending 70%. It may be we get some dispensation in that, but in some ways, it fixes the competitiveness as where it is. It's a paradox. I don't think I'm entirely against it. I think we do need some cost control, but we do need a mechanism by which, a Chelsea or, by whatever means we think it happened, a Chelsea and a Man City were able to infiltrate the elite through investment. And I think that should be a dream and a possibility for every football fan, that somebody should be able to come along and sensibly invest, in a risk-based way and improve the infrastructure of their club, improve the fan base of their club, improve the success of their club, and maybe challenge the elite, as we've seen clubs do. I mean, I would just finish by saying, and this is how ridiculous I think it is. I mean, if the Champions League was invented in the 30s, then, Burnley and Preston would be in the elite, right?
Maybe Union Saint-Gilloise.
Yeah, exactly. We're literally, when we talk about the elite, we're literally talking about the clubs that happened to be around when the music stopped and they were holding the present. I think that we really have a big job to do. It's not going to be easy, but it's great that a group of people are coming together and the organisers are taking the time to really push this through.
I think we've got time for just a couple more. The answers will have to be fairly brief. Steve, when you raise the sort of issues you mentioned earlier when it comes to regulation and organisation of tournaments, when you talk about those with fellow Premier League club owners, chairmen, CEOs, can you take the guys inside the room, and how does that conversation sort of go? And are people receptive to your thoughts on it?
I think for some clubs it's quite remote. I think that there's we have an enormous amount of public scrutiny on the Premier League. So right now the issues that are important to the Premier League are the new deal for football, which is all about how much money goes down the pyramid. It's about the proposed government regulator, which is an independent body, an independent regulator, which will look at sustainability mainly of football clubs because they're such an important part of the community. So this is the other thing that I think plays against reform in Europe, is that everybody's consumed by their own domestic issues mainly, and I have to choose my words carefully. And at the same time, their pockets are being picked somewhere else, in a way. So I know that certainly the league have a growing concern about their own lack of influence over these things. And with the Swiss format of the Champions League, the UCC competition, and that attack on the calendar has really started to focus people's minds that now we have nothing left. We have nowhere left to go. We've decimated every cup competition. We've cut every weekend we can. We've removed replays. We really now are down to the minimum possible number of slots that we can to achieve a vibrant domestic league. So everybody is becoming more mindful of where the next attack would be, and are they really going to try and make us shrink the league?
Okay, so I'll finish with this one. Same question I asked to Daniel and Fran in the first panel, Alex and then Steve. Given all the issues that have been discussed today and the various governance problems that different panelists have identified, why is UEC to you the best forum for addressing these? And Steve, have at this point Crystal Palace committed to being part of the organisation? Alex and Steve.
I mean, as discussed, the ECA is dominated by the big players and by the elite clubs, and the UEC seeks to represent the huge majority of clubs in Europe and their interests. Simply put, they're not currently registered. They don't count. They don't have a vote. They don't really even have a forum until this existed to even shine a light on what's happening. And I think fundamentally all of the elite clubs and the biggest clubs as they stand today, they all need to accept that there is a pyramid, that there are other things about football that aren't money, and that they always need teams to play against. They can't just play. I know that they thought that they could just play against themselves, but I don't think that would end up being interesting to anyone, and I think it would also be, I think everyone here would agree, it would be horrific for football as an entity. And that's what the UEC can do. We can represent everyone else and try and protect everyone else.
Yeah, look, it's obviously I'm here today and I'm keen to talk about these issues and explore where the UEC is going. I think, you know, we need representation somewhere. I guess, in a way, I would prefer the success of this organisation to be that there was root and branch reform within UEFA, within the competitions body, that we really felt like there was a regulatory body whose job it just was to look after the game and not organise tournaments. I think there are some optical issues with clubs in the Premier League who are seen to be so wealthy and have everything going for them. You know, being a part of an organisation like this is that's designed to support this, you know, clubs that are less fortunate, you know, financially than us. When I listen to the distortions of the Irish League, you know, one club getting 120,000 and the next getting 3.5 million, you know, although, you know, we have a big distortion percentage-wise, we do have enough money, you know, to get by. So I think it's an open question for us how helpful we can be as a member and how helpful we can be being able to speak out on issues and just completely freely across the whole spectrum. But, you know, we're thinking about it seriously.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Laurent. Another enlightening discussion. I think that is it in terms of the panel discussions. And I'll hand back to Laurent to introduce the next.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Now we come to the conclusion. Me gustaría dire algunas palabras.
And I'd like to say a few words to the president of La Liga. He's going to talk about Spain, his country. And in Spanish contemporary history, Spain has always shown to Europe the way forward of ideas, the way forward, as I say. And that was true at a political level, in social progress, and today in the environment. So I think it's only normal and natural that this proposal for justice, equality, and transparency for tomorrow's European football should come from the president of a Spanish sports institute. Welcome, Mr. President.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to greet all the clubs who are here, especially those clubs who are part of the ECA, because it seems it's a very brave thing to come here today. It seems absolutely incredible to think that we have to say it's a brave effort in the year 2023 to be here with things that are going on all over the world. So before I start, I can see here at Maduro, and I would like to offer a few reflections. I'm a lawyer too. I'm not going to anticipate the ruling of the Super League because he has said a few things about it. But I think what's important is to know the effects of what could happen. I think that in the previous event, I already talked about it, and I'm going to repeat again. Two things could happen in general. One is what Maduro said, is that there could be some opportunity for the Madrid Court of Justice to accept the Super League, or the UEFA will still be the regulator, but maybe with certain clarifications. But two things will happen. Well, what's going to happen afterwards? I think they're pretty much defined. If there's the Madrid court is going to give the Superliga some sort of right, well, the European Parliament have already said there's been 600 and something votes from MEPs who've said already that they're against the Super League. So the European Commission's almost the same, and the Council of Europe have already said they're pretty much against it. So we will have to see the way forward in line with what they have said. And so this is where I say this association has to be strong. And we're not talking in, too many weeks away, because then the debate will start. They'll be talking with the agents or the players involved to see what will happen in European football. And if We don't have a strong association that defends all the clubs who do not normally participate in European competitions, or even if they participate in European competition, they do not agree with the way that European football is represented by the ECA and the football clubs in Europe. So this association should be very strong. And I'm talking about what could happen in a few weeks. Saying that's if things happen on the one hand. But if, on the other hand, the UEFA was more in their favor, the ruling, well, I have a good relationship with the UEFA, the people who work there, with President Ceferin. But I have to see things as I think, and he knows I always speak what I think. I think that UEFA is being held ransom by this elite football, which are the people or the clubs in the ECA. And so, as I say, this is why this association has to be strong against the others being held ransom. Because what is important is the Union of European Clubs, because if this association is not strong in a few weeks' time, regardless of what happens, the future of European football is going to be pretty dark. I understand that if we're talking about competitiveness, but let's be strategic on the short term. We've got decisions will be made, and we have to be ready for them. And we have to fight against them if necessary. So we need an association like the Union of European Clubs, because there is no one in Europe at the moment, nor any other association. European leagues is a good association. They go to, never make decisions. They're all, meeting and visiting other cities. And this is why the Spanish league left it. Because to go to Amsterdam, have a cup of coffee, I'm afraid, I'll stay in Madrid rather than do that. So this is why this association is very important, because this ruling is going to be pronounced soon. So whichever the decision is, it's still going to be important to make sure the Union of Europe Clubs is strong. At the moment, we are facing several different challenges. And I just said, and this is a challenge of the actual existence itself of European professional football as we know it today. And football has been changing over the last few years. And we haven't faced these changes as we should have done. From time to time, we've said things, but I think we need to face up to these changes, because otherwise there's just going to be no way out, because they're increasingly more the elite clubs, these clubs that have got more assets, because they're always going to exist. We have to respect them, and they're a very important part, because they're the driving force behind football. But but as I say, they have to be the driving force of football, and there's a lot of people behind them. So we're saying if it's a big train, one of these big fast food chains, they have the ones at the front and the ones at back. So we have to think about the medium and the long term. So one of our challenges is fight for the representativeness of European clubs. The highest percentage of professional clubs in Europe are not representative in the decision-making areas of the UEFA. And I've already said this, and I'm not going to repeat myself, but we need to fight. We don't just talk about different forum. We have to fight. You have to be organized. And to be organized, you have to be part of an association. And to be part of an association, you have to believe in the principles. I'm sure that there were certain things that we're not all 100% in agreement with. That's normal. But the challenges will not be solved if we're not part of an organization like this. I respect the UEFA, and I think that it will still be the center of professional decision-making, and I said, and I still think it should be the center of where European football decision-making is taking. But what you shouldn't think what I'm saying now is I'm attacking UEFA as an institution itself. No, what I'm saying is, and what I think is, and what I criticize, is that decisions that are being made within the UEFA that are damaging for European professional football, for all of us, because, these decisions are bad for the big, medium, and small clubs, although the big clubs have a much more short-term future. And another error, in my opinion, is when we're talking about their MOU that they've signed with the ECA, which says that the ECA is the only representative of European football clubs. But apart from the fact that's not the true, you cannot recognize something that's not true, because that doesn't have to be the objective of the UEFA. Why, if you're in the ECA, why can't there be another association? And why can't the other association be recognized by UEFA? So why do the elite clubs in the ECA, why is not another association not allowed to be accepted? Are they not clubs? Are they not the same? do they not represent anyone, all these other clubs that aren't the big ones? Or is the ECA worried about them? I have been the president of La Liga for 10 years, and I have seen the number of phone calls to European clubs that the ECA has carried out over the last few weeks. Why? Because the existence of the European Union of European clubs worries them. So which means that this association works, because if the ECA are ringing up the management of all these different clubs, it means that the Union of European clubs works because the ECA are worried that some of their representativeness is going to be taken away. Because, as we've said, 90% of clubs in Europe are not representative. And it's very important because in this respect, we need to provide solutions. We're talking about governability. It's true. One club, one vote. Well, it's very difficult. Well, we can decide how we can have this representative democracy. But one club, one vote. And the representation, well, we see how it's chosen either by territories, by competitions, by country. But one club, one vote. And the management bodies have to be truly representative. And that needs to be put up now. And we shouldn't say that this association that says it represents European clubs, which is the ECA, or I think only 100 and something clubs have voting rights, and the rest, well, they go to the conferences, like I go to the ones for European League. They go for a museum trip, you go for a stay at a hotel and have a cup of coffee. And that's not right. We need to change the system. It really upsets me to talk about this because this is the year 2023. 2023. And this is still happening in an industry like of professional European football that, we have millions and millions and millions of Europes are involved. Millions and millions of fans are involved. And we're still talking about the representativeness. And I think it's really sad. But let's remember that there are decisions that have been taken within the ECA, FIFA and UEFA that affect all the clubs. Here they're saying they affect a few, but even recently they're making decisions. The Club World Cup. Mr. Parish said this. Another competition to play in June, which will reduce national competitions. Another decision, the Club World Cup was a decision made together with the ECA and thinking who's going to go and play in this competition. If we look at the ECA board, was quite a few of their clubs who were playing in the Club World Cup. And so they do all these things. But there are other decisions that have been made. More national teams in more competitions. I've just got to know how many are involved. I've lost the number. I don't know if it's 42 or 46. Obviously, yet again, it means we have to reduce our calendars. We have to make our players available for the national teams, etc., etc. So that's another decision that was made with a pass. And I think, we should say that's enough, that's enough. We should have confronted the FIFA. We should say, you can't have more national team matches. We should have really faced up to them. Anyway, as I say, now I think it's good that FIFA or UEFA pay the clubs whose players play in the national teams. I think that's fine. But also I think it's fine that now we have to think about the fact that why don't they pay the clubs who don't have national team players? Because when we're talking about the World Cup in Qatar, from Spain, 420 players from our first division, and the rest of the players were just sitting around. They had no matches, official matches. They were training. But you know how difficult it is to have, your players training with no competitions. So how can we allow this? And of course, they're still paying the wages of all these players. Of course, they had to pay the wages. But of course, as we don't have an association that represents us and has influence with regard the FIFA or the UEFA, we didn't fight for all these different circumstances. For me, when there's a World Cup, what really worries me is that our players who are in, the players in our clubs who are not participating, and they still have to be paid. So at least the clubs who send players to the World Cups, at least they get paid by the FIFA, but the others don't, and their players are not playing. So important decision made in financial fair play within the UEFA. I think it's great. I think the UEFA is financial fair play, and I've really supported that. I've worked on it. And also, I'm talking about the decision-making here. I believe in the UEFA workers. But like all organizations, there have to be an audit, an external control that is chosen by the clubs, by the Liga, that control the work that is being done in this particular case as far as financial fair play. Because there's credibility at stake. Because sometimes the decisions come later. This summer, for example, we've seen, and I'm going to refer to PSG, and it's always the same club. And also, as we know, the president of the PSG is, well, to solve their accounts, they sell players to Qatar teams. And I think for about 40 million. And how strange, they were sold to another Qatar team for 40 million. They didn't sell them to Bahrain, they sold them to Qatar. They sold 3 players for this enormous amount of money. So are we going to accept this? You know, shouldn't we have just implemented immediately this financial fair play, because it's distorting the competition? So all these decisions are made within the UEFA, and it's very important for an association to exist that has an influence and that can have representation within UEFA. So I think the first conclusion is one club, one vote. Let's try and get influence, and let's try and have a lot more influence. We've also been talking a lot about the balance, the salary cap of the competitions. It's, well, debatable. I don't know if on a European level, we have to have a salary cap. I don't know, 300 million euros, which is a lot of money, by the way. But there should be one, because it's true. And I think Mr. Parish has said this. You can't take the dreams away from investors who want to be involved. But that dream shouldn't destroy the reality of a lot of clubs. And that is actually what is happening. But of course, as this dream from one of the emir in Qatar, or one of the emirs in Abu Dhabi, their biggest dream is to have a big club in the Premier League. And they're just injecting capital. And so this causes a competitive distortion in the Premier League and in Europe. And so sometimes dreams are great, but they shouldn't destroy the reality of the rest of the competitions. And finally, something that we need to bring up, because I think it's something that should be debated on, and this is if the solidarity model, the current solidarity model that exists in European football, this 7%, which they've, well, I've said, I think they've done well increasing it to 7%. And I said, that's good. But it's the concept of fact is a percentage. Is this correct? I don't know for how many years, it's 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. There's been debates on the percentage. And, you know, this is, you know, what my kids say at night. Do I have to give them 30 years or 50 years when they're going out at night? So is this the sort of conversation we want in current football? You know, should the national leagues contribute something? Why not? But we don't have to sit round a table and talk about it now. No, it's not the fact that we think it's good that it's 7%, but they did it without consulting on anyone. There's been pressure from the UEC, but we can't allow all these sort of things to happen. Why? Because I've said, a lot of people have said that football, the football industry, because it's still football, but it's an industry too, it's not the same today as it was 20 years ago when it wasn't an industry, and today it's an industry. And it's like we're not affecting badly football and sport, but we are an industry that has to be highly responsible. And today, in the decision-making arena, the decision-making is in the UEFA, and they are being held hostage by the ECA. So we need to have an influence to provide solutions to the problems. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. And as we say, you only win battles fighting them, not sitting around a table and having a cup of tea. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President, for your conclusions.
And the meeting, I won't conclude after the President. He was so brilliant. I cannot speak after him. Thank you very much for attending this meeting. I think there is a press conference there. We have to leave the room to go outside. There is a lunch offered by President Dennis. You want to say a word, or it's okay? Thank you very much. Thank you so much to everybody.
I have to say. UEFA has 55, I think, yes, 55 member associations, federations. Gibraltar has the same vote as Spain. Kosovo has the same voting power as England. And although we could probably debate whether this is a good system or not, but it seems to work in other areas of football, so there's no reason why it wouldn't work in the UEC. And I'll just pass it over to Katarina to make an additional comment. Yeah.
The idea is that there will be a general assembly and that all the members will have power to stand for the elections, and all the members will have power to vote for the members that they want to represent them on that executive committee. And in that sense, there will be a committee initially composed of, was it 11 or 13 clubs that we have agreed ultimately on. And they will make decisions. And on that committee, there will be small clubs from small leagues. There will be clubs from big leagues. There will be clubs from mid-size, whatever you define it as. And this is called basically, they will all have the same vote, the same power. So this is called democracy, I guess.
Yeah, hi, Sam from Forbes. Sorry, I entered a bit late, so this question might be repetitive, maybe for Dennis or for Kat. Very broad question, but in terms of young organization, association, where are you in terms of recognition by UEFA, which is obviously a key question?
Yes, well, the thing is that we have just set up. We have had a launch event at the end of April, I think you were. We have just been incorporated a couple of months after that in Brussels, in Belgium, that is. And we are now in the phase of gathering members. So it's a membership drive phase. We will go on with this phase until the General Assembly. Once we reach a critical mass, and we are very soon about to gather more fully voting members than ECA, that is, and after we have that General Assembly, elect the executive board, then we have a good grounds to say we would like to be recognized as a stakeholder. And as you heard from Mr. García del Blanco from European Parliament, we have full support of the Parliament to be recognized as such stakeholder by both UEFA and in the EU Social Dialogue Committee on Professional Football. So that is, we haven't seen, because we are not there yet, but we are very soon going to be in position to actually look for such recognition.
Yeah. Hello, Khaled Naha from Germany, broadcaster Sportschau. I have a question. Do you feel kind of used by UEFA when we just saw the raise of the non-participant clubs' money? So now they can say the money is more for non-participating clubs, and it happened maybe also because of the pressure of UEC, but still there is no recognition of the UEC. Do you think that could be a task for them to use UEC to get their goals without giving recognition?
If the goals are mutual, then we don't have a problem with this. You know, if I would say they haven't misused us. Yes, they've used us to our benefit and to the benefit of the clubs that we aim to represent. So, and this decision has brought a significant benefit to smaller clubs. So we're very happy with this. We don't feel misused. We do feel like it would have been nice, and it would have been. We would have felt better if we would have had received some official recognition from UEFA that our pressure produced this result, but we're not stopping there. We think that solidarity can be further improved, and eventually it's a step-by-step process. And I think that's one achievement, and we have many more achievements to reach. And as we reach these achievements, we can expect more and more statements of recognition and support from those who are involved in the decision-making processes.
Sorry, you first.
Yeah, just on that, I think obviously, you know, it's impossible to say if it was due to pressure from the UEC or not. If it was, it more shows the need for the UEC. if the fact that clubs were getting together and speaking or don't have a voice, and suddenly you can move the dial quite quickly while they're not in the room, I think that if anything, just shows the absolute need for another organisation or association to have that voice.
From another point of view, would you say this could be a step by the ECA to decrease pressure from the UEC if they agree on raising the money for non-participating clubs?
The initial proposal was 10%, and it was by European leagues. We fully stood by that, and we worked along that with the European leagues. So 7%, I'm not sure really how it happened, but some sort of negotiations took place, not in the club competition committee in UEFA though, where they should have. So 7% is just something that we feel was some sort of compromise. That's as specific as I can get. Yes, it was. Yeah. Definitely can go further. The solidarity.
Hello, Joris Gooijman for Dutch newspaper NRC. We touched on this topic briefly before, but this is all about the distinction between elite clubs and the smaller clubs. But a growing number of clubs is tied through their owner to one or more elite clubs, or one elite club usually. To what extent is that worrying you, and does it affect your position?
I think when it came up earlier, it was discussed that it's mainly the unforeseen consequences that are concerning. You can think about lots of different transparent issues with sporting conflict, but in terms of the unforeseen consequences, I would say that would be the bigger issue. And yeah, in terms of from my point of view, having spoken to teams that I would think would be interested in joining the UEC, and then I've had feedback, oh no, we can't because we're part of a multi-club and the big boy doesn't want that. That's pretty obvious as well.
Is there something that you are, as an organization, want to have a position on, or going to speak out about, or is it just what happens basically?
Personally, I feel the same as Daniel spoke earlier, which is that what we need to do as an organisation is get to a critical mass, as Kat describes, and then have votes and come to a consensus amongst ourselves of what we're looking, what everyone wants to happen, what everyone wants to achieve, and what we can do, rather than individual members, giving their own opinions, and then another, 2 weeks later, a different member gives a different opinion, and it looks like we're fractured. We're not fractured. We're united in that we want one club, one vote, and we want the democratic process of the UEC to dominate, rather than individuals having their own individual opinions.
I agree with that point, but I would say, I think it's fair to say as a point to make in general, that football clubs emerged obviously from communities and societies across Europe, and the rules are written in such a way that it's assumed that clubs are going to act as independent, rational actors, and that's no longer the case at all. And the rules just aren't designed for people to be, one, not independent, and two, act irrationally, because it's actually for the benefit of another part of the business. And there's a long way to go to catch up on that. And we should really be trying to figure out, how the rules can prevent, destruction of competitive balance and a whole lot of other issues. But that core point, I think still, if you read through UEFA regulations, the core assumption, just everything is based upon independent, rational actors. And that's no longer the case anymore. And we really have to understand how we can bring that back, I think.
Hi, Nick from The Guardian. Thanks for having us all here today. Just going back down the representation route with UEFA, if you reach that critical mass and feel like you can ask for a seat at the table, obviously in football, if you ask for something nicely, you often don't get it. And they've obviously got the MOU now locked down for a fair number of years. What steps have you got in mind that you would take if necessary, if it wasn't so simple to get a seat at the table? Would you go down the legal route? Do you have a roadmap in mind of how you would approach that?
Well, legal option is never really the first or second or the third thing that you think of. You know, that is something that is absolutely we are not discussing that option. But if we exhaust everything and the organization has no way to go forward, you never know what we can decide as a what our executive board can decide. That is. But at this point, we think it's the memorandum of understanding. We don't see it particularly as a legal impediment for the reasons that I don't think the clause that is inserted in memorandum, which gives sole representation to ECA, is legal at all. And for that reason, I see the issue as more political than legal.
And also, I think the biggest point is we've just had this is our second event. This is an organisation that has been driven by the belief in this idea by clubs, by Alex, by all the clubs in the executive board, by myself, by Katarina, by William, and all the other clubs that have joined the organisation. We've had two events in 5 months. One was a launch event in April. Virtually 5 months later, 6 months later, we have this event here in Brussels. And I think that our biggest tool in terms of seeking UEFA recognition is our growth. This event was, for me, I think was a good example of how we want to project the UEC. And I think that it's a natural process for, if we continue to grow organically like we have been so far, without any major crises, without any major problems. We're just growing based on the firm belief that our idea and goals are genuine. And I think that it just has to happen, that it may be in 2 or 3 months' time or at the next event. UEFA cannot ignore this because there are too many stakeholders here in this room. And they all support the UEC. We're not talking about legal reasons. We're not talking about any other reason, but it just cannot ignore us any further, especially considering our ability to grow further.
Yeah, we will definitely want to emphasize what we did from the very start, that our initial and our actually strategy is to be, first of all, cooperative with all the stakeholders. That's important. And UEFA, first and foremost, I think, of all the stakeholders. And we keep in touch with UEFA. We do deliver to them regular reports as to what we are doing. Even we don't have that obligation or anything, but it is our way to respect their role as a governing body. So they have never objected to us in any way. They know exactly where we are at, how are we progressing, and so that is, there is that friendly path we want to take with everybody, including with the ECA, in fact, where we thought that we could have complementary role and non-confrontational role, that we could together face some issues. For instance, our opposition to Super League is a common issue that we could together cooperate on, and so on. But we will see. It didn't go well so far because they don't see the need for the UEC. They don't really see that they are not giving the clubs what they actually need and want, or they see it and they just can't really admit it publicly. I don't know what the issue is, but our strategy has always been to cooperate with everybody and to be in a friendly relations with all the stakeholders.
What's the biggest challenges that you have at the moment when you're speaking to clubs and trying to co-opt new members? I mean, anecdotally, talking to people, it seems that quite a lot of clubs are very sympathetic to your cause and what you're looking to do, but maybe ECA is getting in quite a lot of ears, I'm sure you know. How do you circumvent that? What are the biggest issues that you're having to deal with to get people in?
I think Alex will be a good person to answer that question because he has some experience.
Try not to be too controversial, but I think that my experience of other football club leaders is generally quite a conservative bunch who are quite focused on their own issues. Football clubs are an incredibly difficult entities to run, and when that's the case, and something comes along that, like the UEC, that can offer you a solution to some of your problems, you think that could be very interesting. And then when it comes to actually committing, you have this, I think people have in the back of their mind, I've got other things to be doing, or as we were discussing with the MCO, maybe they've got a relationship that they don't want to breach. And fundamentally as well, I think, as you describe, Eka, have been putting some pressure on various stakeholders to not join the UEC. I would say those are some of the main issues right now, but I'm optimistic that we can show ourselves in a positive light for an extended period of time in such a way that we become something that people were worried about missing out on.
One certain idea is one club, one vote. I don't know if it is going already too far from a time frame, but do you have already also kind of a certain idea how a fair distribution model in European club competition could look like? We see now the gap is widening between the powerhouses and the rest, and this gap is hard to close even if you turn the distribution model around. So what would be fair in your point of view?
I'll make a first comment and then maybe I'll pass on to Daniel. But Daniel made a very interesting point today, because his idea that refers to when you have this dominance this is in the less developed leagues. It's present in Croatia, it's present in Serbia, it's present in Eastern Europe, it's present where the club has regular participation in the Champions League or in European competitions. It creates a situation of dominance on a national level because the earnings from the Champions League are so high compared to the earnings from the TV revenues in that particular league. That idea is really something to work on, and many of the ideas that we heard today are also ideas to work on, and I think it's very difficult to find the ideal solution. But I may pass it on to Daniel, but I think even from today's discussion, we heard so many perspectives and ways in which we could implement positive change, but if we're not speaking and if we're not discussing them, of course they're not going to be implemented. And the only opportunity we have to discuss them, at least in this sort of environment where we have leagues, clubs, EU officials, we have the political dimension, we have stakeholders involved, and we also have media people sitting here with us today to hear what's the best direction. So that's where the solutions will come from.
Thanks, Dennis. To add to that, again, it's just, I also said earlier on, I don't think it should be, when you talk about the establishment of a union, when a one member, one vote system, the solutions should come from that collective. So I don't think it's particularly helpful to get, I have ideas, I'm sure Alex has ideas, and Katarina and Dennis, but when you come together as a group, after General Assembly and you begin to discuss issues, you can find common ground and also new and better ideas, hopefully. But on that point, I do think where you have this imbalance, it generally comes from leagues where you have, a lack of income in certain areas, or it's heavily weighted. For us, it's match day. But that the association should be given the power that they take the average turnover of the clubs in the league, and there's some kind of mechanism brought in that once the amount of money that one team is earning is above a certain threshold via the average turnover in that division, that there should be a mechanism to distribute some of that finance to the other clubs. That shouldn't be seen as a negative for the club who qualifies. They should still get a substantial amount, but it creates a stronger league in so many ways. You have a stronger competitive balance in the league. When that team does enter European competition, they're probably more equipped to perform better in European competition. So, but we focus solely on this idea that, very few clubs should take the majority. And I mentioned earlier, but that's not, in any sphere, that isn't beneficial to the ecosystem, irrespective of its football or climate or anything else. It's actually damaging to the ecosystem. And it may appear for a period of time that you're in a great period of growth, but ultimately the whole system has been damaged. And I think that's where we are right now in European football.
So I'll just do one more if that's okay. Can I just pick up on something that Dennis said right at the top earlier? You spoke about ECA wanting to, I think your words were, take over all the competitions and reduce UEFA to a regulator. It was only a brief sentence, but could you elaborate a little bit on that and the evidence for and the direction of travel that you perceive there?
Okay, I'll just give an example from from an observer perspective. So I think if UEFA is the governing body and UEFA designed these competitions a long time ago, they started these UEFA competitions, I think that if a decision is being made about such a significant, for us at least, a significant improvement to the solidarity, when was the last time a decision was announced by UEFA on club competitions that it wasn't on an ECA stage? So that, firstly, that's the impressions that somebody would have just observing the situation. I think UEFA should be very proud because it's a key goal of UEFA to distribute solidarity. And if I was UEFA, I would say, here's some good news for all the clubs we look after, because this is proof that we're not looking after just the big clubs and we're concerned about the big competitions. Here's some proof that we are really looking after you. They've left this role or given this opportunity for ECA to do so at their General Assembly. And we know for a fact that the Club Competitions Committee didn't meet before this decision, that I don't know how the decision was made, but the information that we have is that the decision-making processes or regarding football and in our consultations and discussions it's totally weighted in favour of ECA. And that's why I say this, because we have a genuine concern that this will happen, that if you have a joint venture company, if you have commercial relationships with a select group of clubs, that direction itself is a direction whereby the ECA will take over all the financial aspects of the UEFA competitions. That's my personal belief, and I think it's a concern we all should share. Yeah.
Nobody wants? I'll take one more. We just heard Javier Tebas saying that the Spanish league withdrew from European leagues, as far as I interpreted this sentence. Do you think that's a good idea from the perspective of having an opposition to what ECA does and wants? That I would say the leagues and your organization are those two who are opposing this kind of organization.
It's not something that we welcomed, but I mean, you would have to ask LALIGA and Mr. Tebas about this. It's important to say that our idea and the initiative of the UEC was born out of the European leagues. And during our discussions with European leagues, so many leagues and the organisation itself was so supportive of our first steps. So it wasn't only LALIGA supporting us, it was all the leagues that were gathered in the hierarchy of European leagues. And now, of course, for us, it is a little bit unfortunate, not a little bit, it's quite unfortunate that there is this disruption in the structures of European leagues. We're left with the decision to continue working with all the leagues as we have done so far. So we're going to continue, and we're travelling to the General Assembly of European leagues in a couple of weeks as safe to say, as a recognised stakeholder. That's how we feel in our relationship with European leagues. So we will build, our job will be to build as many bridges as we can. We definitely won't be destroying any bridges that exist between us or any other organisation, yeah.